mic up a bit, Stephen Willoughby, that is. Right.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this July meeting of the Audit and Accounts Committee. I'm the chair of the committee, Steve Willoughby, and I'll just go around initially first and let everybody go around and just introduce themselves who's on this call. If you start with you, Joanna, the Councillor West, rather, the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Joanna West, Vice Chair of Audit and Accounts Committee.
And then Councillor Kerr, maybe. You're next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Lucy Kerr. I'm on the councillors in Littleover Ward and member of the committee.
And Councillor Khan.
Sorry, was that Khan or Carr? I didn't
Khan,
see.
sorry, Khan.
Yeah, well, I'm Councillor Shiraz Khan, Arboretum, member of the committee.
Right, and then Councillor Pegg.
Hello, Councillor Adrian Pegg, Councillor for Mackworth.
And then Councillor Dinser. Hello, Councillor Dinser, are you on mute or? Right, we'll maybe come back to Councillor Dinser. Councillor Bettany.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Paul Bettany for the Bolton Ward. I am a member of the committee. Thank you.
We've also got Councillor Dinser who's on the committee. He was obviously having technical problems at the moment. And then I think we've got various officers and people in attendance, including Richard, obviously the ones for the committees, Richard Bowman, the Head of Internal Audit at the Council, and Simon Riley, who's the Section 151 officer, and Steve Mason, who's the Democratic Services officer. And I see we've now got
Chair. Don't forget our independent member.
Oh yes, sorry, and Philip Sund. Yes, thank you. Yes, I couldn't see him on the.
Thank you, Joanna. Phil Sunderland, independent member.
Brilliant, thank you. I couldn't see you on you didn't come up on my screen. And then I see that Ernst & Young have joined us now. Stephen Clark seems to be on the list as well, so that's good. So let's just go through the items after having introduced ourselves. What I'll just do, I think this has been the practice at other meetings, that if you want to speak at all, if you could indicate in the conversation panel that you want to speak, and then I will bring you in order on each of the items. Okay, so that's what's been followed anywhere else. So there's no late items. So first of all, do we have any apologies at all?
Chair, Stephen Mason, Democratic Services. I have apologies from Councillor Patterson and Stuart Green. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. No late items to be introduced by the Chair. Are there any declarations of interest at all in any items on the agenda? No, good. Right. So if we come on now to the minutes of the last meeting, now we've got some of the sort of items that we resolved to go on there. We can pick up in agenda item 5, which is when we're looking at outstanding resolutions. But are there any actual comments anybody's got on the minutes of the last meeting at all? Or just if anybody wants to go through page, just say if there's any comments at all. Otherwise, we'll take those as unless anybody's got any objections, we'll take those as an accurate record of the last meeting then.
They seemed accurate, Chair. So
Happy to propose. Yeah.
Brilliant. Fine. That's back in February. Brilliant. That's fine then. Good. And then the next one then is, if we look at agenda item 5, which is the outstanding resolutions of the committee. I don't know if any of the officers present have any comments on these, but I think myself and the Vice Chair would both be very keen to make sure that things that we, when we make conclusions and recommendations at the committee, that we've got a track of how they're actually being followed through and implemented. So this is where this has come out of. So Richard, I don't know if you wanted to make any comments on any of the sort of items. I see you've sort of, you've got comments on the responsible officer at all.
Thank you, Chair. No, I think that the actual comments in there fulfil the reasons why. If there's anyone's got any queries on what's in the responses on those resolutions, I'm happy to pick them up.
Brilliant. So I'll throw it open to the committee if anybody wants to comment on any of the resolutions or anything in there at all. Otherwise, we'll just note this and note the progress on these then.
No real comment, Chair, other than just to thank the officers for putting this together. I think it's a really useful document to have.
Brilliant. Yeah, and we'll obviously hopefully after this meeting we'll add to some stuff to it from this meeting, I should think. So yeah. Good. Okay, so we'll move on from item 5 unless anybody's got any other questions. So we move now to item 6, which is our work. Oh, it's an appendix. This is what we were talking about earlier. There is an this is our work programme for the year, and obviously myself and the vice chair have put this together along with Richard, and basically this is. A lot of this is sort of standard business, so this falls, the sort of timings of a lot of these fall out of when we have the meetings, which we try and have it roughly in at least, we've got 5 meetings over this municipal year, and we try to have one at least once per quarter to sort of fit in with the quarterly reporting. And a lot of these, particularly approving the accounts, sort of follows various statutory deadlines by when we have to approve stuff. You probably note that normally at this meeting on this day we'd normally be approving the accounts, but they've been SIPRA have obviously extended the deadline on those due to the COVID-19 situation, so we'll be approving those at the September meeting this year. So this is, a lot of this fits in, as I say, with when the various statutory required deadlines are for each of these and the sort of activities that we cover in our remit. So does anybody have any comments on any of these and the timings of these at all? No. So we'll take that as the only other thing to mention is myself and the vice chair will be getting together with Richard probably early sort of September. We've got a meeting scheduled in, and we'll be drawing up a sort of training program that will link in with these. You should note that we've already got training on the accounts set up for September, and that meeting, that meeting request has obviously already gone out. So hopefully that's in people's diaries, in which they'll be telling us how to sort of read the the sort of annual training we get on reviewing the accounts. But then we'll be drawing up other training activities as part of that as well. I just see Phil's typing a message. Is that in relation to this at all? So I'll bring you in, Phil.
Yeah, yes, please, Councillor. Sorry, I don't have a date for the training. I don't know if I've been missed off the list or something, or do we know when it is?
I think somebody, Simon, your PA sent it out, I believe.
I'll find the date and put it in the comment box.
Brilliant,
yeah.
Thank you.
And how's the accounts closing going down while you're on, Simon?
The accounts process is going well. We're working with EY. The accounts were shared with Audit at the end of May, so they will be now published on the website, I think, at the end of this week, because we've just been doing some minor amends, and then it will be dependent on the audit. But I know Stephen Clark from EY will probably pick that up in his audit plan item later on.
Okay, thank you.
I'm actually going to need to bring in Stephen Clark. He's asked to make a comment on the timing of the approval of the accounts, so hopefully you can come in, Steve.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Chair. I mean, I can pick this up maybe when we get onto the timing, but in terms of the timing of the approval, the assurance that we'll be getting for the pensions work won't be arriving until September. So there's probably a bit of a question as to whether or not you can actually approve them in September. You might be able to approve them subject to that information.
That is our hope and desire, but obviously we'll keep that under review. Because
yeah.
the substantive audit will be complete. It's whether we are happy with the whatever assurance if it's arrived from the pension fund auditors.
Yeah.
So in which case we might have to adjust the date of the September meeting. I suppose that's the conclusion from that into October.
Yeah, we will work with Democratic Services to do that. If necessary, we could always call an emergency accounts and audit committee to meet in line with the disclosure dates of the accounts and audit regs, which got amended as a result of COVID. So we'll work around it with the auditors and Democratic Services and you, Chair.
I suppose that fine. And then we've also, I think you actually said, I think the deadline from what you said is in November. Is it November anyway? The statutory from memory, because we've obviously got a meeting in November as well anyway, haven't we? So we can just adjust some of this around. Myself and the Vice Chair can adjust some of this around if necessary to approve the accounts when we need to, I guess.
I think my desire, and I'm sure it would be your desire, as soon as the accounts are ready for disclosure and approval by this committee and the audit ISA 262 report ready, we should try and consider it either on the 30th or as soon thereafter.
Okay, that's fine then. That's fine then. Okay, we'll sort of take it offline and sort of just for the other committee members to note that we maybe need to beware. And I do apologise. It's all new, bit novel sort of chairing. Although I do these things, sort of meetings a lot with work, it's a bit novel chairing doing a council meeting on it. I do apologise to not properly welcome our new member of the committee. I intended to, so everybody else is the same, other than Councillor Shiraz Khan has replaced Councillor Shankar, obviously. So it was obviously now the Labour group leader. So. Councillor Khan, we welcome you to the world of the Audit and Accounts Committee, and I'm sure you'll make a very valuable contribution to it. And apologies for not welcoming you as a new member at the start of the meeting. I just realised I'd forgotten that. So now, if we move on now to agenda item number
Chair.
7. So sorry, hi there.
It's Councillor Kerr. Just before we leave that item, I just wanted to, because we will have this back again, we might correct the typo in the first box under committee that we're talking about today's date, not last year. And I'm just conscious that although I'm usually a fairly optimistic person, by November the 4th, we may know whether we're going to be moving towards a second COVID spike and what the implications of that might be. And also we will have more idea as to what's happening about Brexit. And I think that both those items may be things that we need to talk about more importantly than some of the things that are on the agenda, a provisional agenda for the 4th of November. And I just thought it would be worth flagging that up now to officers to be mindful that those might be important issues by that time, that we might need to move something out of the way. So I don't think we can put them on the agenda now, but I just think we need to be flexible because they might be they might be coming.
Yeah, I mean, and of course we can deal with some of them. Will come up on the I think we've got in November we've got a risk management update there as well. So there's always a possibility we can have more of an expanded session around that because. Scrutinising whether they're actually those two items are in the risk, because I know they are items.
They're in the risk, yeah.
They're in the risk, but whether they, they actually you will get include, and I think we can sort of be mindful of that in terms of that. Okay, so we're okay to move on then. So if we go to item number.
Chair, I think, sorry, Chair, Councillor Shiraz Khan's indicated he wishes to speak.
Brilliant, yeah, Councillor Khan, I'll bring you in. Yes, brilliant.
Yeah, thank you for the welcome there, Chair. I have served on this committee before, enjoyed it thoroughly and look forward to working with you and Joanna again. Just to sort of emphasize what Lucy was saying, I totally agree with her. I think we might be in a situation where the items that we will be discussing will be, not the ones that are on the agenda that will take precedent, but yeah, we have to be, sort of open-minded about that, and then keep, well, the officers have to keep an eye on it and reorganize the agenda as necessary.
Yeah, and as I say, the vice chair and myself have regular meetings with Richard monthly anyway, so we keep track on that, and we've got the pre-agendas, and I know I talked to obviously to Heather as well about the whole risk aspect. But I do agree, I mean, those two items, I do absolutely agree, are very very important items that we need to look at in terms of the risk to the council, and the whole risk to COVID on the council's budget and everything like that. And obviously Simon's put in a comment in the sort of conversation, which is saying in respect to this, we need to look at what is the most appropriate body, e.g. scrutiny, rather than audit and accounts. And I suppose this is where there's this blur this blurring between sort of exec scrutiny, which fortunately quite a number of us on this committee sit on anyway, and audit and accounts. And I suppose what we can add is to make sure that those items are being properly considered and scrutinised, because absolutely COVID and Brexit are two very important issues that are could potentially, and already are, having an impact on the local economy as well as the national economy as well. So, and obviously on the council's accounts and finances. So absolutely, I do think we do agree with you that we should cover those, absolutely. Right, so we can maybe on that work programme then, if we can slot in a note at the proviso at the bottom then, in relation to what we've just said about those, under the bit where it's got other activities not scheduled as yet, we can just add a note there if that's okay, just to say that we may be with changing circumstances through the year. This agenda may have, will be flexible, and officers will change it in consultation with myself and the vice chair as well, if that's okay with everybody. Right, okay, so if we come on now to item 7, which is the external audit plan. So for this, I'll bring in Stephen Clark from Ernst & Young.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. So this report typically would go to a meeting earlier in the year of the audit committee, but clearly events overrode that, and therefore it's been presented here probably later than we would normally have it. What this plan also does is also highlight the areas that we're considering which have got much more link to COVID for the year up to the 31st of March. Clearly the impact will fall very much into the 2021 year, but there are a number of things that we need to consider up to the end of March. What I'll do is I'll focus on the overview of the strategy and then kind of take questions from there, if that's okay. So the first page, I'll just check, is page 5 of the document, focuses on the key audit risks from a financial perspective, and I'll briefly run through those. So we've got risk of fraud in revenue and expenditure recognition, which will have been there in prior years, but with a very specific focus on accruals at the year end and capitalisation of revenue expenditure. Because those are ways you can move the numbers about. Secondly is around misstatements due to fraud or error. Again, there is nothing particularly new in respect of that risk. It's a standard audit risk that we're mandated by auditing standards to consider. The next area of significant risk is in respect of valuation of land and buildings. They are big numbers flowing about. Historically, members of the committee will remember that we've had quite a lot of work done in this area, but clearly one of the key areas is if there's anything material changed to the point of the 31st of March, specifically in relation to COVID. Principally, those relate to fair value or market value based land and buildings. The council hasn't actually got a huge amount of that type of property, so we're hoping that it isn't as much of an impact that we see in some councils. Next area is in respect of PFI and PFI arrangements. Again, we consider this annually. They're large contracts, numbers can move around and result in some material changes, and therefore we have a focus on that. The next area, again, which I previously touched on, is in respect to the valuation of the pension assets and liability. Again, this is going to be a particular area of focus this year, and the reason that it will be delayed in terms of getting the information is that the pension funds are typically obtaining or redoing that information at the 31st of March rather than the roll forward basis that they've previously done when they estimate it in usually the previous December. So clearly the events running up to 31st of March have got a potential significant impact on that liability, depending on the makeup of the assets in particular. The next area of risk that we will consider is in respect to the Sinfin waste plant. We've had quite a number of regular discussions with management. I'll come on to that from a value for money perspective later on. The key point in the finances in this is that there's an element of cost that's been incurred by the council up to the 31st of March, and there is a judgment to make about the extent to which that cost is either expensed or capitalised. Overall, it's not actually hugely material to the council at the 31st of March, but it is an area of focus. And the other element, the next element that we focus on is in respect of grant income and what will have been received by the council up to the 31st of March, specifically in relation to COVID and the year into which that will fall. And then finally, there's some specific work in respect of going concern. There's a new auditing standard that we're working to, which is much more onerous in terms of the level of disclosure and work that is required, both from the disclosures in the accounts and from the auditors. Clearly, the other thing that impacts us is that, when we sign off the accounts, at the point we sign them off, basically we sign them off a year and a day from a going concern basis. Clearly, the world has changed pretty significantly over the last few weeks, and therefore we pay particular attention to that assertion. I would expect, as a minimum, that there will be some form of wording in our audit report, probably what is referred to an emphasis of matters, which summarises management's assessment of the basis of going concern, I don't think there'll be any issue that the council clearly is a going concern because of the nature of the statutory services it must provide. But there is a much broader consideration of that than there would have been hitherto. We've just gone through a similar process with our NHS bodies and come to very similar conclusions. So those are the key areas of risk from a financial statements perspective. Do you want me to go on, or do you want me to pause and take any questions in respect of those, Chair?
I think I haven't seen any people coming up on the message. I think if you just could,
keep going.
Just keep going with.
I'll keep going until someone wants to ask me a question. That's fine. The next page is around the materiality that we set. That is broadly the level to which we believe the accounts present a true and fair picture, and the total number of that is related is just something in the region of 6.5 million, and we report to you audit differences over 330,000. The next element, I'm going to flick down to the value for money section, which is section 3, page 18 of the 19 of the document. So this is the area where we consider the council's approach to value for money. We've identified a number of risks in respect of that area, and what that means is that we need to do specific work in relation to them. So the first of those is in relation to the Ofsted and CQC inspection that was undertaken, specifically in relation to SEND. It was undertaken and reported in June, but clearly a lot of the findings refer to the pre-31st of March period, and there are a number of recommendations coming out of that report that we will consider in respect of our conclusion. That is in common with a number of authorities that we're seeing. The next area, again, is in respect of sustainable resource deployment, and very clearly that focuses on your medium-term financial strategy and how that is operating. Just again, to be clear for members, the opinion that we form in respect to value for money ends on the 31st of March, and therefore we consider the arrangements that were in place up to that period. I'm aware that there will have been a lot of work gone on since that period, which will fall into the 2021 year in respect of MTFS and funding. The next area is in respect of informed decision making. May I just have that comment on sustainable resource deployment? Yeah. The first of the, I'm just a bit confused here on the years. In the final column, it talks about monitoring the financial position for the remainder of 1920. Isn't that 2021? What we have to do, it's 1920, Councillor Kerr, because our opinion runs from the 1st of April 2019 to the 31st of March 2020. So we consider the arrangements that you had in place during the 1920 year, although I appreciate that some of that is in respect of the 2021 year and beyond for your MTFS. Sorry, I do appreciate the word that it is easy to get lost between the years in respect of that. Is that okay? Does that make? Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you. Okay. The next area is in respect of capital projects. Clearly has been subject of a lot of debate within the council, and in prior years we have made qualifications in respect of this area, specifically in relation to the A52 project. You've also had taken a pause in respect of the assembly rooms, and we will be looking at the basis on which those decisions were made in that current time. And similarly, in respect of the Sinfin waste plant and management arrangements, you know, and I would expect that this will be a recurring theme in future years as well. Clearly, there is a staged process to the consideration of that plant. We are interested in the general arrangements that were in place up to the 31st of March for this specific opinion that we give, and you know, have been in discussion and looked at various documents that that management have shared with us. So those are key value for money risks. There are a number of other powers and considerations that, as auditors, we are required to consider. The accounts go through a public inspection period, and Simon will probably have on the tip of his tongue when that period is. I think it's probably, we're probably in the, either in the middle or towards the end of it now. But I don't see at the moment, there's no intention for me to report in respect of those other powers or arrangements that I have from the information I have available to me at the moment. And I think at that point I'll call a halt, Chair. And
yeah, thank you. There, I've got some comments from Phil, but I'd just like to thank you for that. And I do think you've covered at least some of what I can see as some of the key risks, particularly around some of the projects. You've obviously referred to the Sinfin waste plant, the assembly rooms, the A52. I'm not sure about the swimming pool, whether that's anything you need to consider, although that seems to be sort of moving ahead now. But I don't know what would your audit entail in terms of each of those projects? Would it look at the sort of assessment of the financial viability or what? Or?
No. What we're concerned with is the arrangements that are in place in respect of those. So we do not look at these individual projects in huge amounts of detail unless we're aware that there is a specific area of key focus, clearly the A52 being a case in point because of the scale of it and the nature of it and the fact it had a huge impact. We do look at some of the other projects, so clearly we will consider the nature of the decision making around the assembly rooms and you know, swimming pool and performance venue and all the other considerations. But very much our opinion is up to the 31st of March period, so things which have happened after that period fall into the next year.
Of course, thanks very much for that. I'll bring over to Phil Sunderland for some comments on that next.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Stephen, just a few comments on your overview. The risk of fraud and revenue. Going to the first one, the fraud risk. No change in risk. I would have thought there was a significant change in risk, given the issues about the CIPRA are raising about the probability of increased amount of fraud because of the COVID implications, people working from home, people not working from home, people coming into fraudulent situations without difficulty. I appreciate it. This is perhaps not the big scale stuff, but I would have thought there was rather than no change in risk, there was a significant increase in risk on that one there.
So I appreciate, Phil, what we consider in that respect is you know, we're interested in material fraud.
Oh, quite clearly, yeah, quite clearly.
So clearly, you know, so that and clearly we consider the arrangements the authority has in place as a result of that. What we will consider is the arrangements that the council has taken as a result of COVID and whether or not its kind of day-to-day controls have been operating as such. But I think you've got to if you bear in mind about when this started to bite, was very much in the last couple of weeks.
Well, absolutely.
Pretty much of the year end. So I think it's probably more of a consideration for 2021, Phil. I think it probably has increased, but it's probably less impactful for this year.
So that would come up as a red risk possibly in 2021.
Correct. Yes.
Yes, I can appreciate that. And while you're on the Sinfin issue, quite clearly, it is a joint arrangement between the city and the county. Are you liaising with the county auditors?
We've
to ensure that there is consistency in treatment, consistency in how everybody deals with it in their accounts and everything else.
Yeah, so we've had a joint meeting with the auditors and with the county as well, and our intention is to continue those on a periodic basis. As you say, it is a joint arrangement. It is not beyond the realms of possibility that you could get differing treatments, possibly. It's not impossible for that to happen. But what we are doing is making sure that where we would expect there to be consistency, that there is that type of consistency in kind of disclosures and information. Clearly, the key difference is going to be both councils make independent decisions in respect of how they want to progress with it, and therefore there may be an inconsistency just because you independently make those your own decisions. But yes, we are doing the liaison.
And on the going concern, the ISO 570, I'm not an expert on 570. Does that include issues, sort of the possibility of things like Section 114 notices, that sort of thing? And I realise that you're talking about 1920 rather than 2021, and the main that will be 2021. I would have thought.
Okay,
you can't ignore them.
No, that's it's a good point, Phil. So yes, clearly there's been a lot of talk around Section 114 notices that councils may issue. Clearly, we're very cognizant of that. The council, Derby City, hasn't at this point in time gone down that route. But yes, we do. I mean, they're two slightly different things. I mean, the going concern standard is a very much an auditing standard, an accounting concept, which goes to a year and a day from the point of signing the accounts. The 114 notice is really about, for want of a better word, legality of spend, but clearly would have an implication from a going concern basis. I think the other area where it can get slightly mixed is our consideration of sustainable resource deployment from a value for money perspective. So absolutely, the 114 notice and the broader financial position over a 3 medium-term period is considered in that respect.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We got some comments from Simon Riley on that. I don't know if you want to bring out that first comment you raised in your comments as well, Simon, about the meeting you had in February and March, just as it gets on the record as well. Thank you.
Just a couple of comments on what Stephen has fed back on. We recognise with Sinfin it is a joint project, and therefore myself and Pete Hanford, as County Treasurer, invited both Ernst & Young and Mazars in for a joint meeting to discuss the approach we're going to take, and our accounts have the same disclosures in, and as part of the EY audit they'll be looking at the judgments that we've made in how we've treated that, and forming a judgment which I trust is going to be in line with our discussion back in February and March. In respect to going concern, a going concern statement has already been submitted to the auditors, but maybe just to clarify to committee, The judgment call on whether to issue a Section 114 is down to my role as Section 151. Of course, I do that in consultation of discussing with the external auditors and everything else. I know Stephen has said, well, they've not been made aware of a Section 114. My going concern statement says that I do not believe that a Section 114 notice will be required based on the going concern judgment at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's no other comment. Phil's typing a message, but if you want to say anything, Phil,
yeah. Sorry. I was just going to say, I wonder if all members know what a Section 114 notice is and the implications of it. It has happened in, well, threats of one has happened in one of the district councils within the county. I wondered if everybody is quite aware of what they are. That was all. Perhaps Simon could explain in quick terms what they understand. I mean, I know what they are, and obviously Stephen does, but I imagine not everybody does. But I don't know.
Yeah, fundamentally, a Section 114 statement. It's often described in the press as councils getting to a point of where they can't meet their obligations, and the emotive term is bankruptcy. In reality, what it says is that if I feel that we cannot meet our financial obligations, then I need to issue a Section 114 notice, which then limits any non-essential statutory spend and other control issues, and then report back to the council. I think it's within 21 or 28 days. There has been a small modification to that recently, which says that before a council considers whether to issue a Section 114 statement, it should have discussions with MHCLG about the financial sustainability and for any support that they can give to a council in that respect. If people are interested, I can share the formal guidance on Section 114s, and the most recent example where it was issued was Northamptonshire, who obviously then had to do a series of corrective actions to improve their financial health and financial standing. There was one, I think, possibly back in 1980 or something, so they are rare, but there is a view that some councils will be issuing Section 114s maybe in this year, and if not, next year, if more government funding doesn't come in response to COVID. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that. So that'd be useful if you could circulate something, Simon, and we'll obviously consider that when we look at the training programme as well. So I don't see any other comments. So I think, you covered a lot of the items there. So I propose then that I presume we just have to note that report then. Yeah, sorry.
I just wondered if there was any comment on page 40 where they're talking about fees. Because there is a significant increase in what we're being asked to pay for our external audits.
Simon, you've got a comment on that, Simon, haven't you?
I thought we should at least hear officers' views on that.
Yeah. Simon's got a comment on that, I believe. Do you want to come in, Simon? Are you on mute, Simon?
I'm just scrolling to the relevant page. What we just need to be aware of is that the council's standard fee level is set by PSSSA, which is a sort of a audit commissioning body that 95% of the councils have secured audits, of which EY was secured through that contract. And there's a basis that any fee amendments need to, as much as possible, be in agreement between the council and the auditor. So EY came to me early on in the year and said that there were some fees that they thought they needed to charge in respect of additional work that is required. To be fair, we went through it line by line, and I said there were certain ones where I thought there was a basis for that, either in terms of prior year audit or increasing audit work to sort of look at a risk factor. And there were a number where I said I was not in agreement, and if Ernst & Young wanted to progress that the challenge, if you want to call it, to us. They would need to go to PSSA, who commissioned the service, who would then, if you want to call it, deliberate on the validity of that increased charge. So what is in here is what we sort of discussed with EY. I think it was probably back in about February this year.
Okay, thanks for that. I think that clarifies it.
Just clarify that whether this includes those challenged elements or not.
I'll let Steve respond to that, because ultimately these come from EY.
Yes, it does, Councillor Ken. Just to, if I can just, so Simon has absolutely reflected the conversations that we had. This is a conversation that we're having with every local authority under the PSCA contract, as well as all of our clients beyond the PSCA contract as well. And the process, I think we've had a very appropriate professional-based discussion about it. I understand and respect Simon's point of view, and the process that we go through is to go through to PSA now and say, okay, well, this is the base on where we are. The council has a view and a challenge to that, and we will land somewhere as opined by the PSAA, and that's the process, and I think that's probably the most effective way of dealing with it.
Well, brilliant, thanks for that. Thanks for clarifying that. So I don't think there's any other comments. I propose that we'll just note that report and thank the external auditors for their work and obviously what they're doing under what's for all of us challenging circumstances. Right, I see Heather's joined, so we're gonna come back to items 7, 8 and 9 later and move on to the items that she's concerned with, which is 10, 11 and 12. So Heather, we'll bring you on to introduce item 10, Heather.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this report presents it's the risk management monitoring report for the period to 31st of March. So in effect, what we call quarter 4. At the end of that period, there was a total of 16 risks. We did see a few changes, and I will talk through those in a moment. The full 16 risks are just listed at paragraph 4.2. So you can see at a summary level what those risks are, lead officers, and also kind of risk ratings. There is a lot more detail contained in Appendix 1, which show the kind of the risk cause effect and also mitigating actions and controls that are in place sitting behind those risks. So if I just perhaps talk through where we have seen changes during quarter 4. So obviously you will be aware that this is set within the context of the pandemic, which hit in March time. So inevitably we have reflected that in the updates that we have provided on the strategic risk register. So the first one is around project management governance. So obviously we saw considerable progress during 1920 with the establishment of the project management office and the implementation of the recommendations that emerged from the A52 report. I guess what I wanted to reflect during this quarter was that we at that point, when we did the update, we were still just trying to ascertain the possible impacts of COVID on our projects, and so we are continuing to do that, to be honest, through our quarter 4 and also our quarter 1 updates. And also I have a vacancy in the project management office. If I can just reassure members that this is being covered by other members of staff, and the PMO board, which did pause temporarily just during the COVID period as we focused on other priorities, has reconvened from June onwards, and actually has a new chair now, which is Simon Riley, as our Section 151 officer. So that's the first change in risk rating that we reflected, but I feel that mitigating actions have been undertaken there. The second one is around Brexit. So This risk rating had been assessed as low previously, I think just due to the COVID impact and the concern of, the potential impact on Brexit negotiations, service demands and the economy, because, for example, we could see the double whammy of COVID and Brexit hitting, which I think is, needs to be reflected on our strategic risk register. So hence we did up the rating here. However, we have ongoing mitigations through our Brexit working group, which has been meeting regularly. We maintain a separate risk register on the Brexit transition, and we've reviewed that quite fundamentally recently. And the other thing that I would say is that the recovery work that we are doing from a COVID point of view will actually, I think, help mitigate the Brexit transition. Because you're aware there's an economic steering group that's been set up in the city and an overall recovery plan that's being developed in response to COVID. But as I say, I do feel it will help to mitigate some of the impacts that we may see from Brexit. The other risk where we saw a change was around the inability to deliver a balanced medium-term financial plan. Now, back in March, obviously the budget was approved by full council, so a balanced budget was put in place. So hence this the risk was reassessed and lowered. So I mentioned COVID and the impact of COVID on our strategic risk register. And at 4.5, we have listed the 3 additional risks that we have added. So that's first of all around the increase of numbers of individuals, households in need following COVID, the impact on and the risk around business resilience and loss of jobs, and also the risk around financial unsustainability. And again, there is more detail in terms of cause effect, what controls we have in place, and also what mitigating actions are being undertaken in Appendix 1. So I think that was probably everything that I wanted to update to committee. I'm obviously happy to take any questions on that.
Okay, thanks for that, Heather. Just a couple of things on that before I bring in some other people. Firstly, in terms of the project management aspects, really, I don't know what have you thought about, if you're trying to fill a position now. I don't know where you are at the stage of recruiting for that position, but what have you done to sort of, with businesses sort of, making people redundant and stuff in the city, to sort of do some arrangement or discussion with one of those businesses to see if they've got any experienced suitable project management people that could come in and booster up the team, fulfill that role and that sort of thing. And I'm concerned when I was reading through this beforehand about that drop in the risk in project management, because I know it's something quite key with the sort of number of projects, looking at what was discussed on what the external auditors have said under the previous general items. And I don't know if you've seen a tweet from Chris Deutsch, from the BBC. I don't know if there's any where this has come from, but I noticed a tweet he had where he said the project management office set up by the Derby City Council in the wake of the A52 roadworks issue appears to no longer be in place. And he said the council says the risk of project management being ineffectively governed has increased from possible to probable because of vacancies and COVID-19. So is that something that's come out of has he read this item, do you think? Because it came out. I
think he has. Yes, yeah. I think he has. I mean that's where it's taken from, Stephen, and obviously the media are at liberty to comment. I think it's unfair to say that it's not in place, just from the point of view of the fact that we have been continuing our monitoring of the Q4 dashboard. We have been continuing the project management board arrangements, and we have been continuing to put projects through through the gateway. We've actually also undertaken a review of the PMO in its widest sense as to how it can add kind of greater value value to the authority in terms of good practice, and I've been working really closely with Simon on that. In terms of the vacancy as it stands at the moment, it is part of a wider restructure that's taking place, so I'd rather not go into significant detail about that, but I take your point that obviously, subject to any wider recruitment, then obviously we would, encourage, kind of external candidates at that point if appropriate. So I don't know if that answers the question, Councillor Willoughby.
Yeah, I just came up as a suggestion, and obviously I am concerned because it has been something, because it is crucial, the whole project management area, is why it's dropped, why it's sort of taken that drop in risk. It was one thing that obviously you've added in what I would expect to be the key risks given the current climate, and so that just reflects that, and you just to give us some assurance that those new risks that you've got there are being managed and that mitigated, and that project management one as well. So I've got a couple of people wanting to ask questions. So firstly, Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. Now, I recognise this is the report going to the end of March, and we're now in July, so presumably there's a Q1 thinking that we didn't quite get to this meeting. But there are three areas two straight to the areas that are concerning me. One is Brexit, and going to the appendix for this, where there's that bit more information about Brexit transition affects delivery of services, SR 11. It seems to be very laid back. We don't seem to be we're looking at it from a very very sort of operational, we are powerless position, that it's monitoring the effects. It doesn't seem to be there's nothing there that's being proactive about what we might need to be doing. So, for example, if there are significant delays in the ports, which if we have a no-deal Brexit, I think there might be, then we would expect the provision of fresh food, for example, coming from Europe may be an issue, because of fresh food won't last in the lorries that's coming across. This is the time of year when we might be able to be doing something about that and working with others to say, actually, we need to grow more of our food ourselves in the UK. And but there's nothing here. It's very laid back. This is saying, well, we'll monitor it. And I just wonder whether there's a responsibility for us to actually flag up these sorts of concerns and be at least talking to the LGA about the sorts of things that we need to be doing, and seeing if there is any concerns in other local authorities about those sorts of things, or other measures that we might be as a city more in a position to address. Is there any sort of discussion like that happening? Because if not, I don't see the government doing it. So that's the first question.
If it's okay, can I come back on that one? Yeah,
Certainly.
it's really interesting that you say that, because actually the last couple of meetings of the Brexit working group, to be honest, we've had the same discussion, because I think what we have learned through COVID is actually the power of working in partnership and collaboration. To really make an impact on particular challenges that we have. So what we felt from a Brexit point of view was that actually, I mean, particularly at a regional level, I do think we need to work more in the region. So, for example, I've been in touch with the Chamber of Commerce and the LEP in terms of how we can join forces in responding to Brexit. So that is definitely the direction we are going. And I agree. I mean, initially, I think the Brexit group was focused on, in particular, no deal planning. That's where we were. We have, I think, since then widened the kind of the focus onto more proactive. Actually, what can we do? What can we do with our communities and our businesses to try and mitigate the risks and take advantage of any opportunities that there might be through Brexit. So no, that is in progress, definitely.
Well, thank you for that. The second area is this area of COVID, and again, this also seems to be very looking at it in a very analytical. How do we deal with matters? But we are the public health we look after public health in the city as a council. We have the expertise in environmental health in terms of tracking and tracing. We've seen what has happened in Leicester when these things aren't managed properly. But there's no risk here related to those functions that we have. I've not had any responses back from questions I've asked in terms of what we're actually doing proactively about COVID in Derby, because we have those public health and environmental health responsibilities as a council. And I know that there are other councils who have been addressing these and being proactive on it. I think the outstanding one has been Ceredigion in Wales, where their COVID levels have been really low. Now, if we can control our COVID levels, which councils are beginning to do when they're rising, but they're not doing it proactively beforehand. So at the moment, I think we've got some of the Manchester authorities who are watching things, as well as Leicester, and have reported in the paper this morning that they are doing things. But we're not doing that. There's nothing here in terms of a risk to say, let's proactively look at this. And the second, allied to that, is what happens if there's a second spike. There's no looking here at saying, we're talking about second spikes, maybe in Spain, maybe coming to us in the autumn, but what are we doing to mitigate those risks? We haven't even got it as a risk. There may be a second spike in COVID in this coming winter. I think it ought to be there, and we ought to be putting mitigations in. So those are the 2-3 questions.
Yep. The risk of a second kind of surge is certainly reflected on the risk registers of the tactical coordination group that's in place, and of course, obviously, the outbreak control group has been set up in direct preparation for that. I think the Q1 update may see an updated position. Obviously, at the time that the Q4 position was done, they were the key strategic risks that the tactical coordination group deemed to be appropriate. Now, obviously, things have moved on over the last few months, but certainly that second surge is already articulated on the risk register. Now, obviously, we may choose to escalate that to a strategic level as part of the Q1 update.
And what about the position of ourselves as the public health authority, and with those track and trace skills in environmental health? Where isn't there a mention of that here?
I guess because at the point it wasn't deemed to be a risk at the point that the Q4 updates were put together. All I can say is that is reflected as mitigating actions against risks that we have contained within the COVID risk register.
COVID became a notifiable disease in January, February, and environmental health has a responsibility to track and trace notifiable diseases. Why was that not happening?
I think that's a separate question, if I'm being honest, and I'm not necessarily sure that that's relevant for this item.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Adrian Pegg.
Thank you. I appreciate, obviously, with the pandemic, the risk scores, have increased and it's had an impact. Do you think in the next coming months the slippages will be addressed and sort of you'll catch up and things will improve, scores will improve?
Do you mean slippages in terms of backlogs in services?
Yeah, the risk scores. So the risk scores have increased because of the pandemic, etc. But will they decrease in the coming months so you can sort of catch up, basically?
Again, I think we just need to kind of continue to monitor it, and obviously we are continuing to do that. So I won't anticipate, because I haven't yet seen the Q1 information, but obviously we are continuing to reflect on where we are and the latest position, in terms of the controls and the mitigating actions that we have in respect of those risks.
Thank you.
Right, okay. So then let's come now to, obviously the report recommends that we don't have any risk surgeries, but it's whether anything sticks out at any committee members, particularly I suppose for me around SR6, and whether we need to have any, whether we should have particularly have go into that project management aspects in a bit more detail, seeing as that's dropped. So I don't know what committee members think on that one. And then I think Councillor Kerr wants to come in. If there's any recommendation you wanted to make as a result of your comments as well, Councillor Kerr.
I'm still concerned about the two areas that I raised, both in terms of Brexit, and I think that given that there is that work that Heather's reported going on in the Brexit Working Party Committee, whatever it's called, I think that it would be really interesting to be able to know what is happening and to feel, in some ways, I think there might be a political angle that we maybe need to pick up on this, given that Brexit is something which is in the political domain and not in the sort of science environmental domain. If there are things that we need to be feeding back to the government, I think we should hear them. Whether that comes under audit or whether that comes under exec scrutiny, I'm not sure, but I would be very happy to do that as a risk surgery to know what's going on. And the second one is this point of COVID and how we are proactively dealing with that. And again, it may be something that we need to look at as a risk. Obviously, very new in. We haven't had these changing their status because they didn't previously exist in the previous quarter. But again, I can see that it might be seen to be an exec scrutiny or even whichever scrutiny deals with health, but it has such wide repercussions for our communities, for our economy, for people's well-being and the economic well-being. It could be in here, and obviously for the council itself. But either of those, I would be very happy to be participating.
Yes. So I don't know if you wanted to formulate those as sort of things to say. What in the chat column, Councillor Kerr, because a while Councillor Dinser's got a question he wants to ask. So Councillor Dinser.
If I could.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on COVID-19, I'm not sorry I missed the earlier conversation on this paper. I had to just go out for a bit. Is there one of the issues which we understood from Leicester was that the local council getting access to data on testing and people presenting symptoms was given late, and listening to the public health director in Leicester, they said that if they had the information earlier, they might have been able to put mitigation circumstances. Now, I'm hoping that things have improved since then, and there's been learning at national and local level, and then the timeliness of information which is made available to local councils to understand trends and therefore step in and try to put mitigating circumstances in is there. But is that something that we need to understand, and whether that needs to be monitored either through internal audit or some other point in the council? Because it seems to me that the quicker we get information, the quicker we have it locally, whether it's our public health director or whatever, the more chance we've got to actually put interventions in place to stop it escalating further and end up with a situation like the lockdown that Leicestershire are still experiencing. I just wanted a viewpoint from officers and the committee members on that, because that potentially could be a risk unless we have assurance that that's been mitigated, and then we have better, more timely information exchange from the national to the local.
I think, sorry, if I could just come on back on that. I mean, my understanding is that we are receiving data on a timely basis, and we are also producing weekly surveillance reports in terms of cases and in terms of geographical areas where those cases are occurring. So whilst obviously I don't represent public health, my understanding is that, you know, timely data is being received. I know Leicester did experience significant problems, but we feel that adequate data is being provided. I think there will, you know, as we go through the pandemic, I think there is always room for improvement in terms of what national government is able to give us. But certainly at this level, the outbreak control group, you know, have that data and can act on it.
May I just come back on that, because knowing the general location of a case of COVID is no good for, well, is considerably insufficient from the point of view of an environmental health officer who is trying to trace the contacts of somebody who lives in the, you know, this area of Pear Tree, for example, or that area of Mickleover. They need to know where that person is, where that person works, what potentially which bus they use to catch to and from. If they're not if they're only given the general locality, it makes tracking and tracing very difficult, which is a environmental health responsibility.
Can I just suggest on this point that there is actually an outbreak engagement group that has been set up as part of the wider governance. So members do have the opportunity to raise questions through that forum, and that group, I know it met last week for the first time, and it will continue to meet every 3 weeks. So what I'd suggest is that if there are particular queries, that it is fed into that group, because that's its purpose.
Yeah, I think so, because I was going to say some of this could be done at a more detailed review that we could action from this committee. I think if people want to go into that sort of detail, we could possibly put a proposal in to have a risk surgery on the whole area of COVID, but it's, you know, to get assurance that you've got these mechanisms in place. Now, I think I've got a couple of suggestions here. The Councillor Kerr has said that she recommends that we hold risk surgery on Brexit planning, including proactive actions being taken with local and regional partners. And then Councillor West has added that this could be a joint thing between, you know, members of the, there's an overlap anyway with a number of us being on this committee anyway, but it could be a joint thing, but scrutiny, risk scrutiny between audit and accounts committee members and exec scrutiny members as a joint sort of risk surgery. So that's a recommendation there, that we have that. And I think we should also, I don't know what other committee members think, I'd be concerned about the drop in the sort of project management governance, particularly in the light of, you know, because it is a key event of the council, and it is one thing that, you know, after the A52 issues that the council are committed to, for putting right, you know, to sort of that they put right. So I would be concerned to make sure that the right, you know, mitigations and governance was in place around project management as well. And then there's another recommendation from Councillor Kerr that's come up about having another risk surgery jointly with exec scrutiny to look at the reaction to the COVID-19 infection. Then it's to do more with the science of infection rather than the community support and maintaining business as usual, as far as we could.
Sorry, if I can just come in there. If I can just, I was going to say, suggest that actually none of those risks that you've talked about actually hit the criteria that the committee agreed with which to hold risk surgeries. That was just the first thing. Around Brexit, if a joint session with exec scrutiny would help, I still feel, I mean, at the moment there is very little coming out of government around this. To be able to know exactly what the goalposts are around Brexit. However, if you want to hold that, obviously it's the committee's recommendation. Around project management, again, I think we will know better once we have seen the Q1 updates from specific projects. So what I would suggest on that one is that we hold until you have seen the Q1 position before doing a risk surgery on that one, because as I say, I do feel that appropriate mitigation has been taken there. And then I think the third one around COVID, if I'm being honest, there is significant work going on to put together the outbreak control group and the engagement group. It feels like that is the mechanism through which I think engagement should be being undertaken with members. At the moment, the public health team have an awful lot on in terms of preparing for a pandemic. I'm just thinking about the kind of working out at the moment, putting it, is a risk surgery the right thing to do at this point? That's all, because it's going to, it will take up resource that actually could be going into preparing for a second wave.
Right,
but obviously I'll leave that with members of the committee.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got Councillor. Yeah, I'm happy to, on my suggestion on the project management, based on what you've said, Heather, I'm happy to, make a note to keep it as a watching, just to make a note on that one, to keep it as a watching brief for our next meeting when we get the Q1 updates. And I'm happy with that from what you've said, and to see that you've got get assurance that you've got the right mechanisms in place on that one. I've got a comment though from Councillor West first, then Councillor Dinser.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Heather. I think actually what you've suggested is really useful. I was quite happy to agree with Councillor Kerr, but I think the follow-up comment about it being more to do with science and infection made me wonder then whether that should actually come anywhere near us and whether it should go to the appropriate health scrutiny committee and not have anything to do with us. I would rather see it, the COVID and Brexit, in relation to community support and business, because I think that has more of a relevance to our committee and exec scrutiny. But I do think that it is, it's very changeable, isn't it? We all know that, Brexit and COVID, and we don't know what will happen. And I think it is, as you say, probably right to just keep an eye on it and to discuss it maybe at our next meeting.
Councillor Dinser.
My comments on COVID-19 weren't about doing a risk surgery. I was thinking more in terms of, have we got reassurance that wherever the work is being done, it's the risks and the issues are being dealt with. And if Heather, you're not the expert in terms of, you're not the lead on health, but I think we do need, as an audit committee, to have some understanding. It's a potential risk. We do need to ask questions, not to burden public health with a risk surgery, but what work is going on. For example, I don't know who's on the who's represented on the two groups that you mentioned, Heather. And then if we know that as members of the audit committee, and then we can see how that's doing. But maybe bring back some sort of assurance about what you're saying at the moment, that the work, you understand the work is being done. We're getting timely data coming in, which is localized enough. Because one of the other things in Leicester was not knowing where the outbreaks were. The whole of the city was shut down. Whereas there's subsequently there's been discussions about if there's localized outbreaks, how to keep it local rather than having it inflicted on the whole population. And that's something surely we need to make sure and get a reassurance that that is something that could be mitigated against in the work that's already doing, and get an update on that either for the next meeting or in between, because COVID is a very fast moving situation. So
yeah, I think that's a fair point. I will take that back to the kind of the tactical coordination group / COVID program board. I know one of the things that we had been looking at in terms of communication was how we communicated with members and how we kept people informed. So actually I will take that back and see whether there is something that we can put in place in between, or if not, arrange an update at the next meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Dinser. I'm just going to take one more, which is Councillor Kerr wanted to comment. Then I'm going to wrap this up based on what's been discussed, if that's okay.
Yeah, and that was helpful, Heather. And I'm I'm more reassured actually after your comment that there's an outbreak engagement group that exists than I was at the start of the meeting. And I don't know what the COVID programme board might be, because again, these are two bodies that I haven't heard mentioned. And maybe I've not read through all the briefings that we've sent out, some of which have been very copious, but not always very relevant. But I was at the Health and Wellbeing Joint Board with the county last week when I hoped that they would be looking forward and saying what is happening in terms of public health to mitigate and to be anticipating that things may not continue in a positive trajectory. And there was no discussion about that at all, and that really made me worried. A lot of it was to do with being sort of self-congratulatory, working really well together with the businesses and the voluntary sector. And there was a lot of, how emergency services had come together, and it was really positive what was being said, but it was all looking back and not anticipating. And I think that there are two levels of anticipation that we need to be taking. And this is where the risk and the risk management comes in, and it may be that the engagement group or the programme group is looking at this. One of which is to say, what can we learn for COVID this coming autumn? And the second one is, this is a pandemic, but it's a pandemic that seems to be killing about 1 in 100 people. There have been pandemics which kill in 1 in 50 people. And what are we learning from this really quite benign pandemic for the future? And that is a really chilling thought, but somebody needs to be thinking about it, because if we don't learn from what we're doing now, when are we going to learn?
Okay, thanks. I'll let Taylor comment on that, and then I'll sort of try and draw this together. And so I only want comments on what I'm going to say in a moment after this.
Yeah, I mean, the various groups that have been referred to are just part of the council and the local resilience forum, which is our partnership, part of our response and ongoing recovery from COVID. I mean, in terms of that kind of lessons learned, I absolutely agree, Councillor Kerr. I think we need to learn the lessons. So there is a debrief going on, certainly at LRF level, and also we are intending on doing the same within the council to just learn, in terms of the response that we have managed over the last 4 months, to just kind of, to learn the lessons from that. So certainly we will bring that into our planning for a potential second wave.
Okay, thanks for that. So I think what I'm going to suggest that we obviously note this as a recommendation, we note this report, but to also say that the committee, I'm just going to paraphrase this, but the committee noted the work being done by the various local boards at the council, which I guess Steve will note in the minutes anyway, around the sort of COVID and Brexit risks that are ongoing, and that that there's an action to circulate more details about those working groups to the committee, to committee members in the meantime, including, I think Councillor Dinser made a good point, including to get some details on the composition of those two committees. And then, as Councillor Kerr was just saying in the comments, that if we could get an update on those committees, that we can have at our the constitution and what they're doing and the outcomes of those working groups at our next meeting, just really to get that assurance that those mechanisms are in place, I think. So on that one, and then just to make a note for us to keep a watching brief on SR6 at our next meeting, just so as we don't, we'll all be sleeping between then and the next meeting, just to note that, so as we don't forget about that one and what we've said there. And I think you're saying something, Simon, as well. I don't know if you wanted to come in at all just before we wrap this up.
Well, thank you, Chair. I think
in reality, I know Councillor Kerr has asked for a report on COVID and Brexit next time. You'll be receiving the Q1 strategic risk assessment, which we're happy to add a bit more narrative into that. But can we just clarify whether you are wanting a separate report, which I don't think is necessarily what I've heard from a discussion at this point in time, or whether you just want a bit more detail in the normal Q1 update?
I think that's a valid point, actually, Simon. I think that can be handled through getting a bit more detail. You know, if we can get stuff circulated in the meantime, I think Councillor Dinser made a good suggestion on that, around that, and who's on these various working groups, to get a bit more detail for that to be circulated. And I think if we can get a bit more detail on those risks in the next update, I think that would suffice, because I think our view is to make sure that the mitigations are in place. Now, I don't know if anybody thinks that we should recommend to the appropriate scrutiny board, corporate services, I guess, that they maybe take a look at these in a bit more detail as part of that meeting. Yeah. Certainly, I can talk to the chair of the Councillor Nato, who's the chair of that anyway, whether that's something that could be done. I think, you know, I can go and talk to him about that, and obviously Councillor Kerr and I within our group can talk to him about that as well.
Yeah. Just for information. Sorry, just for information, Corporate Services Scrutiny Board did receive an update on COVID at their meeting last week, actually. So they have already had an update on COVID. I will, just in response to the I think the comment from Councillor Dinser, I will refer, you know, I will take away an action to liaise with public health colleagues about briefings for members around COVID. But I think as Simon has also suggested, we will also I think improve the narrative that we have within the Q1 report for those two items in particular. But yeah.
And we'll note that. I think you're nodding, Councillor. Did you want to say anything else, Councillor Dinser? You're nodding on that. Brilliant. So yeah, so we'll.
That's the sensible way forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I think what we'll do is we'll take that and we'll make that as an action. We can record that on our conclusions from this committee, that as an action, and to circulate, as you say, more details about those, and then just to keep an eye on the project management as a watching brief. We'll take that as more detail at the next meeting. We'll take that as our sort of conclusions on that. And if anybody's got any, I'll take that as read unless anybody's got any objections at all. No, so thank you for that one, Heather. We'll move on to your next item. So I just need to come on my iPad here, to the conclusions from the risk surgeries. And I should mention that these were held, most of us were there, so this is just formalising as a formal document the outcome of the risk surgery. So I don't intend to revisit the risk surgeries, other than I'll make a suggestion now that the conclusions from these risk surgeries are added to our outstanding resolutions, okay, at item, which we covered under item 5 today. But I don't know if you've got anything else you wanted to add on those at all, Heather.
No, they are purely for information.
Right. So does anybody want to comment? Does anybody want to comment? Otherwise, I propose we note these and move on. And other than that, I think it would be useful to get the conclusions and the actions from these added to our outstanding resolutions. So
can I just support that move of the actions into our list of things? Yeah.
So anybody got any objections to that?
No, Chair.
Otherwise, brilliant. We'll move on then. Good. Right. So your final one, I think, Heather, is the annual report and review of performance, which again, obviously those of us on exec scrutiny will be aware that this was presented at to the cabinet, and obviously to the July meeting of exec scrutiny as well.
Yeah, I won't say a lot on this report, but it's just in line with good governance principles. The council does produce an annual report every year, which reports back on the progress it's made in relation to the council plan, the actions contained within the delivery plan, and key performance measures included there. It also includes budgetary outturn information, and publicises kind of the high level elements from the accounts. So this report just really summarises that. It presents the annual report kind of in a summary, user-friendly version, and also the appendix, which contains more detailed information about the outputs and outcomes. Other than that, I'm just happy to take any questions. As you mentioned, this was approved by both Council Cabinet and also Exec Scrutiny. Didn't have any recommendations on it last week.
So I think this is presented here just to give us the assurance that it is being done and monitored, and we're seeing that they are issuing, the Council are issuing an annual report, and it's being sort of accountable, if you like, to sort of issue out so any members of the public can read it. So if anybody wants to sort of ask any sort of specific questions on this, but I think it's in terms of the general governance framework. So Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, I realise that it's been agreed, and I am on exec scrutiny, and these are points that I possibly should have mentioned there. But has it actually been printed? Because if it's not been printed, there's just a couple of points that I just wondered whether it was worth.
No, it's not been printed, and I'm happy to make any minor modifications.
Well, there are 4 points that I wanted to raise. One is the Climate Change Working Group. Will it be reported in the 2021 one that the Climate Change Working Point has been disbanded, because it's arrived and it's been disbanded now? So that is quite interesting. In terms of priorities, there was no mention of climate change. And I think the message that the Climate Change Working Group no longer exists and it's not mentioned as a council priority doesn't actually show the council in very good light. Okay, it did exist at the end of March, but it wasn't active at the end of March. I met once. The other thing is in terms of blue bins, there's a reference to related on COVID, that black bins kept going and brown bins restarted promptly, but it's actually the blue bins that restarted promptly and the brown bins were a bit later. And there's no mention of blue bins there at all, and I think that is an omission, and you might like to amend that bit of wording for that. The other thing is actually a question to Mr. Riley, because I just wondered where we stood in the prompt payment of debts and what the council is owing to Derby Homes, which I believe is less than it was at the end of March, but it isn't a particularly good record. So you may not have the information here. Thank you.
So do you want to respond first, Heather, then I'll let Simon to respond as well to his specific question. But I would say just generally to add to Councillor's Kerr concern, looking at are we governing stuff, I mean, I know it's not directly related, well, it does have an impact on the finances, I guess. Climate change is a big key issue of the day, and if we're not having sort of governance frameworks around that, or hopefully you're gonna give me assurance when you reply to Councillor Kerr and myself, then I think that is a matter of concern, that there doesn't seem to be the governance frameworks in around that key crucial issue.
I think around climate change, I think that's a more substantive point that I think needs to be. I'm not proposing to make changes to the annual report there regarding that. I think if there were issues regarding that, that probably should have been raised at exec scrutiny. I'm prepared to make I'm happy to change the wording around the bins. I think that's a factual accuracy point of view. But yeah, so that's kind of my response around that.
And Simon. Are you on, Simon? You're still on mute by the looks of it on the list of people. Have you got? You there still? He's still on the list of people. He's on my top row, in fact.
Can we follow that up later?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, if we can follow that up later. But otherwise, I think Councillor Khan, did you want to say anything then? Did you want to add anything? I see you're typing a message. Oh, you're back again. All right, fine. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks for letting us know. So I think that I don't know what other committee members think about the climate change issue, about how what's the governance framework in around that, because we have the council has declared 18 months ago a climate change emergency, and that was voted unanimously at full council. And I think the committee, it's our role as a committee to check that there is the governance frameworks in around these key and crucial issues. Councillor Kerr, I don't know what you said. You wanted to give some comment on that.
Yeah, well, the members, the councillor members who were on the working group, and the working group never was opened up to a wider community or partner membership, but the councillors who were on it were asked whether they would roll the activities of the climate change group into a green element of the economic recovery plan for COVID, and it has now got a green element to that recovery plan. And ourselves, as the 3 members who were on that working group, have now become climate champions without the authority of the full council, which other champions have, but that has sort of been slid in with the acceptance, I believe, of cabinet. And the 2 groups, neither the Independents nor Reform Derby have members on that, but they have both been invited to have a climate champion as well. And these 3 members are being briefed by the climate team within Planning Environment as to what's happening, and our next briefing is tomorrow morning. So we will have had, I think that'll be the 3rd meeting, either the 2nd or the 3rd meeting, as climate champions being briefed and doing I guess, oversight role on behalf of the council for that. The structures around that, I think I agree, are somewhat weak and unclear. I'm not quite sure how the recovery structures are working, but maybe Heather or Simon can say a bit more on that.
Sorry, Heather.
You're absolutely right. I mean, decarbonise is certainly one of the outcomes that that is being developed in terms of the economic recovery plan. I wonder, in respect of the annual report, I feel like we have reported back on the action that was contained within the delivery plan. So I think from the purposes of this item, I think we have met what was asked. If you would like more information around the developing governance arrangements for the decarbonise bit, I'm happy to take that as a separate action and obviously speak to the relevant teams around that.
Yeah, I think that would be useful to take that, note that as a separate action to sort of distribute out around the committee more details around that, if that's okay. But we'll come to that in a moment. So, Councillor Dinser, I think you wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, sorry, Heather. It's my fault. I mean, I'm not really up to speed with the action that was around climate change within the performance. Can you just share with me what was the actual action and what's been?
The action was contained in the action was contained in the delivery plan, which, hang on, if I just bring it up, it was to develop a partnership action group. I think that was the action, but let me just.
Sorry, develop a partnership.
Sorry, I'll get the exact wording if you come back to me.
But it's around that, and I don't want to be holding you to account for any detailed. Just it was about an action group being developed.
A working party.
Yeah, I tell you what, I will circulate. Sorry, I can't put my hands on it at this very precise moment, but I will copy the extract from the delivery plan that we included, and that's what we've reported back on, Councillor Dinser.
Yeah,
because it didn't actually fully form because it didn't have any partners associated with working party, so it did barely exist by the end of the.
But I know that is now being that is now disbanded. But that's partly why it's being built into the economic recovery, because obviously that is very much being done in partnership. So yeah.
As you say, if you could send us out more details, that would be useful. So I intend to note just to say that we'll note this report, but take an action, Heather. If you could send out more details on sort of new governments around sort of climate change along with the COVID thing. So everybody's okay with that. Anybody not okay with that?
Yeah,
Otherwise,
that's fine. I mean, in view of the chair, thank you for that, Heather. I mean, in view of the resolution that was passed in full council about climate change and implications for report writing and all activity in the council having due regard to impact, positive or negative, towards the aspirations on climate change. Is that something that where is the right place to sort of monitor and observe and how that's going to progress? Because that's a fairly substantial requirement for all reports to have a comment on climate change implications and in our decision making as a council, and then how that will may impact positively or negatively. Where I'm looking for advice more than anything else on this one, Chair. Where is that going to be followed, and how much of it is an involvement for this audit and accounts committee?
That's a good point, actually. Yeah.
I mean, again, obviously we're working with Democratic Services to make sure that is built into the decision-making template, basically. So that I think that will be where it will be reflected. But obviously, we can bring back more detail on that in due course.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Brilliant. Thanks very much for your contributions on that. I propose then to move on with that action, to note in the report, and then to move on along the basis of that action that Heather's going to give. But obviously Steve will mention in the minutes about our ongoing comments on sort of governance of climate change, and Heather's going to give us more details around that. So I think that's yours now, Heather. Thanks very much for that. And I'll move now back to...
everyone. Just to make sure everyone's aware that the report refers to waivers from the 1st of July 2019 up until the 28th of February 2020. And whilst that seems like a long time ago, this is a report that was prepared for audit and accounts meetings that didn't go ahead, or the agendas were changed, and so we didn't get to submit this report. The comparison with the previous report, which was only for a 3-month period, and this is obviously for an 8-month period, so the numbers look considerably worse than they were, but if you look at the percentage of avoidable waivers, it's actually remained quite constant. The details of the unavoidable waivers are included in the report. So other than to just give you this as information, if anybody wants to ask any questions on the avoidable waivers, then I'm happy to respond.
So I had to take myself off mute there. Fine, thanks for that, Linda. I suppose I've got a question on the one, I'm just bringing any other committee members first, but I've got a question around the avoidable waiver around the Christmas decorations that you've got at the top of the report there, obviously. Gone off mute again. Is there any more details on that?
Sorry, Chair, I forgot to unmute myself then. I'm assuming you are referring to the, you said at the top of the report, but I didn't think it was actually. Sorry, I'll go back. To the blade chair illumination, the £175,000. This is for your, for the parcels that were placed on the marketplace. Which was done as a waiver because obviously it was a concept that was decided was required. Not quite sure it lived up to expectations in real life for some people, but because we couldn't do a competition because it was unique to that provider, that's why it's down there as a waiver. And avoidable because with pre-planning we could have done a tender process which says this is our space, what is your proposal to make the marketplace beautiful at Christmas? And then we could have compared all sorts of different options. But that work going around seeing what was available was done outside of a formal process. So faced with a fait accompli, for transparency, we raised the waiver.
Right, okay, it's a bit concerning that, but something so crucial as the Christmas offering in the city centre didn't go through the proper process. It was a thing that sort of stuck out to me, as I read through it. I mean, what sort of investigation or sort of lessons learned type of thing has there been around this? Then why you didn't sort of put it out and get sort of different contributions, and why it was just determined to go with this particular operator. I know there was a mixed reception on it as well, of course.
Of course, all I can say is it came to procurement as a fait accompli. Obviously, people that were involved in the process were made aware that what process should have been undertaken, but unfortunately by the time it came to procurement, with the time constraints, because we can't move Christmas, I'd like to be powerful enough to do that sometimes, but because of the time constraints and because of the fact that they'd got to be ordered in time to actually be on the marketplace to provide the Christmas offering, there was no other way to be transparent and to get this order placed so that they could be in situ.
Yeah, Councillor Dinser, I think you wanted to come in with a question.
That sounds at the face of very concerning, Chair, because in terms of audited accounts, transparency and decision making. Linda, can you just clarify? You said that by the time it came to procurement, it was a fait accompli. What are the checks and balances? What governance? I mean, I don't know how much money was involved in this declaration. The amount. It'd be helpful for me to.
175,000.
175,000. And if this was sort of pushed through, overriding procedures and checks and balances, and then, which you said, but I think I've heard publicly about the impact or the lack of impact or the lack of, support for what he was trying to do and achieve, there's a real concern here. And I don't know what you as officers are saying to us as the Audit and Accounts Committee about all the avoidable waivers, but this one particularly in terms of taxpayers' money being used effectively, and we can all make mistakes, but to actually push it through as a fait accompli, I'd like to have more information of where that decision was taken, who by, and how it was allowed to be pushed through in the way it did. And I think I heard you say, despite concerns being raised about, single employer. I know we can sometimes put justification for single provider funding allocations, but it seems on this one, and Christmas isn't something that comes onto us suddenly. It is something that's planned way ahead, I think, if I remember rightly. So the planning for this and sort of leaving it at the last minute to bring something in doesn't sound like the right way to proceed and spend taxpayers' money. Can you just give me some more clarity, or anybody else on that? Because I'm quite concerned about this in terms of that bit about pushing through at the last minute, despite maybe reservations raised through the procurement team.
Linda, sorry, can I just barge in, because my question is also about this item, and I think it just might be easier to save you having to keep answering things. Yeah, sorry, thank you, Chair. Appreciate what you've said and the things that other people have already asked. It was it was the main question I had. The questions that I suppose I have is, do we know why it was pushed through without sort of the consideration, just bearing in mind that at full council budget setting a few months ago we agreed cross-party to give more money to Quad, for example, because of the sort of decimated Christmas offering, partly because of not having that footfall, because the parcels didn't include or didn't bring people into the city centre, into the marketplace as we would have hoped for. And just wondering the procedures for that, because as everybody said, and you said, we know when Christmas comes, we can't change it. It's a heck of a lot of money to have spent on something which, again, as other people have said, maybe didn't live up to expectations. But just that there doesn't seem to have been any consultation about what was best for Derby and what was best for that space, given that we weren't having the ice rink, because I think the contract for that had expired. But also as a follow-on for that, do you know, given that we're now almost in August, what plans are afoot for the Christmas offering for this Christmas? Because given this waiver was from September, we're not that far away from, kind of going out to tender for something in addition to those parcels, which is what I understood was the whole point to it. And my other thing, I'm just going to throw in, on the last page of the waivers, there's the top one, the property design and maintenance. The date for it is the 13th of October 2020, which I assume should be 2019.
Thanks for Councillor Weston. Sorry, I do apologise. I muddled up your comments there with. I thought
I'll let you off, Chair.
Previous item. Sorry, and I do apologise. It's my mistake entirely. I thought you were commenting on Heather. And if Councillor Kerr, is your question in relation to that, or is it a different item? If not, I'll take it.
Different item.
Different item. Right, fine. So I'll let Linda comment on. Sort of Councillor Dinser and West's, and indeed my points. I absolutely agree with the points that questions that Councillor Dinser asked. I think that's made basically my sentiment as well on this.
Thank you, Chair. This is me recalling from my memory cell, because I don't have actual paperwork in front of me, and I'm happy to clarify to attendees after the meeting. But my understanding to it being late coming to procurement was because in the first instance we were trying, the decision around not having the ice rink was delayed for one reason or another, and I wasn't party to those discussions around the ice rink, so I can't fully say why the decision was taken not to have them. But the process was going on behind the scenes rather than it being a formal process. So when I say we were presented with a fait accompli, the actual process of identifying what could be put on the marketplace and a decision being made as to this is what we want, how can you make it happen for us, was how it came into procurement. Now that doesn't mean to say we didn't do our due diligence checks. We did all the finance checks on the company, even though we weren't doing a process. And of course we raised the waiver and a contract document so that there were sufficient terms and conditions in place so as not to put the council at risk. So, and apart from that, all of the waivers, of course, are reported to DLTs, Directorate Leadership Teams. So it's not sort of under the radar and probably as backhanded as my saying it came to us as a fait accompli probably sounds. And obviously it was probably done with all good intentions to get something on the marketplace. And I must admit that the, as always in these cases possibly, that the sales information and the mock-ups of how they would look in the marketplace and what the light show would be like was considerably more dynamic than actually sent to come to the fore when they were actually in situ. With regard to this year's Christmas offering, to say that it has been fluid would probably be the correct term to use, because obviously there's been all the issue of the assembly rooms and what was happening at the assembly rooms and what space would be available and what could be put in that space. We have currently just put in place all the outdoor eating and the pods and everything in the marketplace. The marketplace is full. That it currently is in place until the end of October, but once we have some feed as to how people have reacted to it and what is happening, there is the potential for that actually to be extended into Christmas. So no, what we're doing at Christmas has not yet been finalised, but because we've obviously reacted to COVID and put this interim outdoor space in, I am in the loop. Me and my officers are being kept in the loop as to what decisions are being made. So I'm going to say there will not be a waiver for the Christmas offering on the marketplace this year. And if I get shot later because somebody's let me down, so be it. But that is
they're very strong words, Linda.
Yes, I do try. And that is.
But I did go yesterday to the marketplace, and it was super.
Oh, good. Nice to have some feedback. There's been lots of hard work done in the background on that one.
Yes, I have heard.
And with regard to your question about the waiver for property, the start date being incorrect, I completely agree with you. That is an admin error, and it should have been for a year, starting in 19.
No, that's fine. That's what I assumed, but it's always good to get it clarified.
Yep.
Okay, so is there any comeback from you, Councillor Din, before we move on to Councillor Kerr and then Councillor Shiraz-Khan? Yeah. Is there any comeback you wanted to sort of come back on that, or recommendation or anything to note about that at all, either Councillor West or Councillor Dinser?
Yeah, I'd like to come back on that. Linda, are you saying that the single waiver, which you're not going to let happen this time, which happened last time, should, in terms of proper procedure, should more than one contract, provider should have been considered to provide alternatives for one in terms of cost effectiveness and in terms of delivery? And are you saying that all the checks and measures were still applied, or was it still was not a fait accompli in the last minute, but something that would say this is what we want to do, make it happen? Which that is a different, in terms of competitive procurement and the rules, particularly for £175,000, and sort of and the implications, albeit we know now rather than at the time. Were the proper procedures followed, and and should there be more a competitive commissioning process, procurement process for this? What are you saying on that?
For clarity, what happened was the process that was carried out was informal, and obviously there was an element of affordability within what could be provided on that space for that amount of money. I was of the impression that a member was involved at the time, but I don't know who, so I can't speculate on who that was because I wasn't obviously involved in the informal process. And because obviously we need an audit trail of a process, an informal process can't be audited. So the waiver was done as the official audit trail as to what had happened. Once I was obviously then said, an officer came to me and put the hand up and said, I've done this wrong, this is what we want. We've had sign off from a member to say this is what we're going to put on the marketplace. Please, can you make this happen for me? What can we do? So we did finance checks on the provider to make sure that we weren't putting the council at risk in that respect. And we had legal do all the due diligence on the terms and conditions under which the parcels were being supplied. And obviously there was already buy-in through the property services team to make sure that all the installation and everything was done in accordance with how the council would expect that to do. So with regard to the actual, there was no risk to the council with this contract. The the waiver is because there was no formal process done, and we couldn't be audited on the process that was done because those records do not exist, other than this waiver saying that a process wasn't done.
That is concerning to me, Chair. I don't know. I'm not, the expert on this, but I think if a member, I know you don't have the details now, Linda, but I think more detail on that whole decision-making process would be helpful to actually in terms of what we need to do as a Audit and Accounts Committee on this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need more details on why the proper procurement and proper governance on something so crucial. And it's certainly, when I read through this report in preparation for this meeting, it's the one item that's really sort of hit me, stuck out to me, really. So I agree with what you and Councillor West has said. I know Councillor Kerr, I know you're next, but if Councillor Khan, if your question or comment is on this particular waiver, I'll let you come in. Otherwise, I'll leave you till after Councillor Kerr. Was it on this particular waiver or not?
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. It is. It is on this, actually. Well, it's. My concerns rather are the same as Hardiel and Joanna, without wanting to be repetitive, but it's quite unsettling that we've spent 175k without proper tenders. I'm sure that with the proper procedures followed, we not only could have saved money on this particular piece of the marketplace decorations, but use that money to enhance the rest of the city centre. And whilst this sort of water under the bridge, we can't go back and revisit it. And I fully sympathise with Linda's position as well as to what happened and why it happened. But the only thing I guess as a committee we can do is to make sure that all officers are aware of this and that no further mishaps of this nature happen, and that any and every piece of business that requires a tender should be out there. This was not unavoidable. This was an avoidable error. So that's all. I don't really want to sort of say everything that Joanna and Hardiel said already, but yes, it's unsettling, and I find it hard to fathom that we spent 175k without getting a second tender estimate.
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor. And just from a governance mechanism, that's what struck out at me as well, as I was saying. And this include me as well in your hopefully, because it struck out to me, that just why something so crucial as this would be handled on a waiver. And I think we would need more details. If any of you, while we deal with Councillor Kerr's question, wanted to make a table a recommendation, then we will. I'm happy to consider that. Councillor Kerr, I'll bring you. Yeah.
It's Simon Riley. Can I suggest, given the basis of a discussion and we haven't got all the facts, is that maybe you could invite the Director of Leisure to your next meeting just to explore how sort of event commissioning and this waiver happened in light of Christmas wasn't movable, etc., etc. Because I think a recommendation might actually sort of not be what you want here. I think it could be that you might just want Claire Davenport to come and give a bit of background and give you some assurance of how we might commission it in the future.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. That sounds like a good suggestion. I recommend. If everybody, are you okay with that one? Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, we can do that, but I think the process, we just need more detail, because there's a member who made the decision, there's a officer who said I've done the wrong thing, and then a decision having to be made, and all accounts of checks and measures about the bona fideness of the provider was all done, but it's that decision making. So we do need more information before we can sort of see what we want to do with this. At face value, it seems concerning.
Yeah, it gives absolutely
information.
Absolutely, that's what struck out to me.
Sorry, Chair. I'm happy to ask Claire Davenport to bring some of that context to you, because what this is highlighting is it's a waiver that was exercised, as we say. We want to understand why the waiver was exercised, but how can you get assurance, as Linda is trying to say, of that she does not see that a waiver would be applicable in the future, and how would you get those assurances?
Okay, thanks. I think that's good. I think that's right, and I think hopefully she can answer some of the more detail, presumably, that Councillor Dinser is asking for at the next, when she comes along, Simon. Then, as you said, I think that would be helpful. So, Councillor Kerr, let me bring you in now with your question.
Chair, would you mind if I just came
Joanna,
back to Simon?
sorry, yes,
Thank you,
Joanna
thank
wants
you,
to come back,
Lucy.
so I missed yours.
No, just to say, I think following on from Harjil's comment, that given our next meeting, whilst I'm happy to speak to Claire and find out information from Claire, because, you know, as we know, Linda doesn't have the detail and isn't expected to have the detail on every single waiver that's gone out. Given that our next meeting isn't until the end of September, and at that point, you know, committee would want to know that this isn't happening again this year, can we get something perhaps in writing, or, you know, can the chair and vice chair maybe meet with Claire before the next meeting, so that we've got some assurances before the end of September's meeting, because obviously this is, you know, there's the potential for this to happen again. I know Linda's sworn on her life that this isn't going to happen again this year, but we won't hold her to that either. So I'm just wondering if we
I am more than happy to
do something between now and.
Yeah, I'm more than happy for to set up a meeting with Claire Davenport and the chair and vice chair, and we can take some notes to share with the rest of the committee about the assurances that you sought and the answers given, and we can just have a catch up of that discussion at the next committee. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Simon.
I think that's good, actually. So we've come to a good sort of solution on this. Thanks for suggesting that, Councillor West. I think that was probably the best option. That was really good. It's teamwork, you see. Value
it sounds very good to me.
Yeah, it's good. So we'll do that before the next meeting, and you and I will have a meeting with. If we can take that as an action, then to set up that meeting, so you can start after this meeting, we can start to suggest some dates for that, and then we can go from there. Right, okay, so I think Councillor Kerr, you had a comment on one of the other items there then.
I have, thank you. I wanted to, a slightly larger sum of money, which is towards the bottom nearly at the bottom of page 4, which is to provide commercial advice to support the development of business cases and deliver a number of key regeneration projects, etc. 189,000. And really, why was that? Why did that come in without any sort of competitive tender? There might be a good reason, but we've still got Linda somewhere.
Yes, I'm still here. I can give you the background to that, Councillor Kerr. It's actually because what's happened was we've commissioned this company to do various smaller pieces of work across different projects on the council. And then we were looking to actually appoint them on a single contract to carry on with the work that they'd already done the background to. So to actually change then, the cost of change would have been quite considerable. Now, we explored all the avenues we could to do a compliant direct award, but couldn't. So the most transparent way to do it was via a waiver. It's the amount of money is there because it's down as a maximum spend, and it's the most that it could be without it coming under EU procurement law. So it's actually not a commitment to spend all of that amount of money, but it's to make us compliant in seeking our advice to take these projects forward. Obviously, that's probably more significant now since the events that have occurred since that waiver was risen, because obviously regeneration projects in the city are even more key since COVID to try and bring the city back to life again. But it's because of the experience and the previous work that had been done by that organisation.
But can I follow up on that? That if we think we're going to go beyond that spend level, have you been contacted to say we need to go through a better procurement process, either for the period that this goes through to next March, or beyond that? Are they considering that already if we think the spend is going to be higher?
The contract review dates are in place for what needs to be done going forward. And in fact, that will be scheduled for next month, because that's what time frame we'd need to put in place an effective tender. But that's because it's a waiver, it still goes on the contract register, and it's still then it's then got to be contract managed and all that, the feedback and the contract reviews done, because regardless of route, it's a contract for the council.
So if we wished to extend that contract beyond the current deadline date and beyond that funding level, would we have to go out? Would we expect to go out to tender?
We would have to go out to tender because of the because of the cumulative spend.
Yeah. So that's thank you for reassuring me on that. The other question second question I was going to ask was about the pest control, and why the ongoing. I can see that we want to get rid of these mice, full stop. And then why was the ongoing pest control not gone out to tender?
Right, well, there's two pest control waivers on this. The original one, and forgive me because I'm not technical at all, but the original waiver was to get the company in that would put all the things that were akin to lavatory brushes and pipe cleaners around the gaps in the building, and that was what that was for. My understanding is that that wasn't as effective as we expected it to be. So the second waiver is for the ongoing treatment, if you like, for the poison being put down, etc. Now, I've actually had an email only yesterday from facilities management to ask me to help them to go back out to tender or quotation to put a formal contract in place following on from this that expires in October. So in that respect, the system works, but it was obviously because of the ineffectiveness of the first waiver, which had to be done quickly, because obviously we were overrun with mice. Because of that effectiveness, we had to do a second urgent waiver to get a different resolution in, which does appear to have worked, although possibly because most of us are working from home, I think the mice are too.
Okay, just as it seems, if there's any learning from that, let's make sure we take it. And finally, I just wanted to ask about £80,000 worth of book tokens. The last item on the list.
Sorry, yes, I'm flicking from the report and then forgot to switch my microphone off. Yes, all those book tokens were previously bought on procurement by the use of a procurement card, and of course a procurement card is not is meant to be for small one-off purchases that don't warrant actually a contract being put in place. So the waiver in this instance was to formalise it so that we could actually monitor spend more effectively, and then this period will be used to put in place a more formal arrangement so we don't have to arrange a waiver in the future.
But it's 1 day.
Because my understanding was it was a single order.
So we've got them all in stock somewhere?
Yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, in terms of cash flow, is that the best use?
Well, in terms of budget expenditure, however it's staggered, it's still coming out of a budget at the end of the day. But obviously that was how the department wanted it handled, so that was done as a one-off order.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for that. I don't know if anybody's got any more questions. I have to be honest, I'm afraid my laptop went funny, and I've come back in on my iPad to this meeting so I can carry on with the meeting. But if there's no other comments, I will suggest we note that one with the we note that one with the comment that we made earlier about the meeting with Linda Davenport, and then we'll
Claire Davenport, Chair.
Claire Davenport, sorry, it's because I've had my eye. Sorry, thank you.
No, it's fine. You haven't missed any comments or any questions.
I've had my thing suddenly disconnected from the Wi-Fi, and then it's I'm trying to connect back into the Skype meeting, but maybe before I make with that comment to meet with Claire Davenport. Sorry, it's because it's the IT's annoying me. So if without any further comment, if we bring in item 9, and I think Richard said that he be introducing item 9 and then handing over to John and Tracy, who joined us. So if you want to bring in item 9 then, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will. Just briefly, what I want to say is that this annual report pulls together several areas of the Council's counter-fraud work to demonstrate how our overall framework is working. The covering report outlines the components of our counter-fraud framework, and what I'm hoping is this will link in with the planned work on countering fraud that I've got built into this year's internal, well, I say built in, but what I want to do as part of this year's internal audit plan work. And a lot of this is going to be achieved with close liaison with the corporate fraud team. So I'm now going to hand over to Tracy, who's going to talk to you a bit more about the work of the corporate fraud team.
Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody else. Hope everybody's okay. My video, I think, is just starting.
Hi, Tracy.
Have I arrived yet? Oh, here we go.
No, I can hear you.
I can hear you, Tracy. Thanks very much. I'm conscious you've got a packed agenda today, so I'll move straight on. The report on this occasion gives the annual picture of the counter-fraud team's activities for the 19-20 year, and I just want to say that our focus very much this year has been around prevention and detection across a wide range of potential areas of fraud within the authority, including housing, supported exempt accommodation, working closely with our social care teams and our insurance team. And in addition to those areas we've been looking at, we've also been heavily involved in the single person discount review, and that will continue as we move into the second phase of that project, which will be the continual phase. Just to go through a little bit of the highlight of the results that we've had for this year. 16 Derby Homes properties were recovered this year, and 8 right to buy applications were withdrawn. And if you, on the appendix there, I think it's appendix 10, is it? I think on the report, it talks about the amount of savings we've delivered, and we're looking at just over £2 million worth of savings, of which 750,000 of that is actual cashable savings, and 1.3 million in value for money savings in there. These have come across a wide range of areas, as I've mentioned, including council tax, non-domestic rates, housing, and we continue to look at those areas. We continue to provide intelligence work for our modern slavery and organised crime groups, and until the COVID situation took over, we were still undertaking joint investigations with the Department for Work and Pensions. In light of the COVID situation, I think what we're going to find for next year is a very different landscape, because the first part of this particular year has been heavily involved with dealing with the business grants. We've been more or less since the start of this financial year totally involved with that project, and I would say that for several weeks at the start of this year, I think we had 100% involvement of the counter-fraud team dealing with that part of the work. The team does continue to support the grant payments, so we're now dealing with the discretionary side with Gareth Donovan's team, and we will be moving into the post-payment checking phase in the next few weeks, and Richard and I have been talking about how we're going to provide an assurance for that and what our project will be. So we'll be working closely to make sure we identify any cases that have been potentially paid incorrectly and or fraudulently. I'm pleased to say that we are looking to recruit a new member of the team. We've received some funding from the HRA because of the significant amount of work we've been doing with Derby Homes and the results we've had there. They've invested in us for a post for a further 2 years, so that's really good news. And following Councillor Kerr's suggestion a little while ago, we approached the social housing providers. We went out with a service offer to several of our local service providers, and one of them has come back, and it looks as though we're hopefully going to be working with them in the very near future. John, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Thanks, Tracy. Not really. I think that was very comprehensive and set out what we were doing last year, which is clearly the focus of this particular report, very well. I think it's very right and proper that you reference the difference that this year's report will look like given the COVID situation. But no, I think that was very comprehensive. But clearly, Richard, Tracy or I will be happy to take any questions regarding the business support grant scheme or indeed anything else.
Well, brilliant. If anybody's asked any to go on to ask any questions during that, I'm afraid I've just come back on my laptop. I had problems reconnecting, but I was able to hear most of that because I connected in on my iPad. I've got Skype for Business on my iPad as well, so it doesn't give me quite the full experience, but yes. So if you could just, I've had a blank sheet. I've got Councillor Kerr and Councillor Bettany. So if anybody else wants to ask a question, if you could come in on the comments during those, and then so Councillor Kerr first.
I love the idea of the full Skype experience, but I must admit I find it quite limiting compared to sitting around a table. But there we go. There's two questions. One is I'm really pleased. Well, it's not a question. I'm really pleased that one of the social housing providers is interested in working with us, because I think that's really positive. And on the similar front, I'm interested. I know that that lockdown has meant that some people's living arrangements have been changing, and I think that as a result of that, there will be people who are now living together who weren't previously living together, and therefore there will be empty properties that previously weren't empty properties. And I don't know whether if you've done any work exploring that, and it might be something that comes up as we finish, as the electoral registration process goes through, that there might be more information coming up on. But I'd be interested to know if you've looked at that element already. Thank you very much. Oh, and just thank you again for the amount of work that's gone on in terms of the business grants, because I know I've seen from casework perspective that has been looked at very carefully, but we've come to some good conclusions on that, both for businesses and also for some voluntary organisations that were having problems.
Thank you, Councillor. John, shall I respond on this one?
I'd be more than happy for you to respond on this one, Tracy.
In terms of empty properties and potential living togethers, we have been receiving referrals at a much lower level than we would have done pre the COVID situation. But nevertheless, the referrals that we've had, we have acted on as best we can without being able to visit. But certainly going forward, they are in our system and they will be progressed. We're trying to ease the lockdown now, and we're looking towards doing some sort of intelligence type work back out in the field, albeit actual visiting at the moment is prohibited, so we won't be doing that element of it. But certainly a lot of our intelligence work is desk based, so we've been able to progress certain things through that, and we're coming up with some imaginative ways of how we can deal with these things. And a lot of that is quite a direct approach in terms of contacting the customers in different ways and basically posing the questions. And whilst that might not elicit a criminal investigation, if we can deal with it on a civil basis because of the new ways of working, then we'll continue to do it that way.
Thank you for that. Is that okay, Councillor? So I do apologise, everybody. I've had to.
Yeah, that's fine.
My iPad again because my laptop has disconnected itself from the internet. It's obviously not our internet that's down because my children that are here would be complaining if it was, and also I wouldn't be able to log in on my iPad. So it's our wonderful Microsoft and wonderful Apple has come to the rescue again. Sorry, no sort of endorsing or plugging of products. Sorry.
Hello, Chair. Can I just add a couple of things to what Tracy's just said there?
Yeah, sure,
Is that okay? Yeah. First of all, Councillor Kerr, just on the bit, you're absolutely right. This current situation means that different people do different things in different living arrangements, and I think it's just important just to say a little bit more about the single person discount review, because that's been a key piece of work over 2019-20, and we'll be picking up again on that soon. And the council, as it stands, has about 38,500 households across the city where people are claiming a single person discount. Before we started working with our provider, that figure was nearly 40,000. So we've already seen a reduction of around 1,500, which has clearly meant additional income for the council. It's important to say that the second part, which we're starting on in August, it has been parked a little bit because of COVID and the other things we have to do as urgent tasks. Every single claim that comes onto the council's books for a single person discount review will be scrutinised over the next 3 years under the existing contract that we have in place. And there's two reasons for that. We know because we last did a major event back in 2009-10, and whilst that was successful, what we do know is that over time fraud and error can creep back into the caseload, and that's why we chose this time around not only to do an initial big bang of everybody, but also then to continuously review to make sure that fraud and error doesn't creep back into the caseload. And the important bit for that is it's okay taking 1,500 people off and removing their discount, but if the council's going to really benefit from that, it needs to be able to continue to bill the increased amount of council tax year on year. So that's the first bit. And the second bit, just out of interest on the business support grants, figures that I have as at yesterday, just to show you the sheer size of the task of business support grants. We had, as at yesterday, 4,355 claims made, and of those we had awarded 3,478 at a total value of 42.4 million. So I hope that gives you a flavour for the size of this task. It's been absolutely huge. And what I'm really quite proud of is the fact that whilst it's clear that some of these grants will have been paid to people who weren't entitled, we've already, because of the tight rein we had on this, been able to identify these, and we've had a number that have already repaid their grant in full. So the recovery has already started before the official recovery that the government wants us to do has started. And I think that just shows what a grip we've had on this business support grant. So, and that's very much thanks to Richard and his colleagues' help. So hopefully that just gives you a flavour of the size of that task and how well I think we had the controls in place.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry, I'm still having problems with my laptop here, and I think it's the laptop because, as I say, none of my other internet's all working okay. I have Councillor Bettany next, and if anybody else has, and I've looked, which means every time I go in and out, I lose all of the comments for some reason. So
there are no other comments, Chair.
It was just Councillor Bettany. So if Councillor Bettany would like to come in with his question.
Thank you, Chair. This is all very good work, very commendable, and I'm fully in agreement with it. But obviously, not completely infallible, nothing is. And I've just wondered, have you got anything in place for accidentally sanctioning people and them losing of money when actually they should actually be getting the benefit to get in place? Because obviously we wouldn't want to see anybody being sanctioned and actually running short for what they need. Thank you.
Can I just ask, Councillor, in what respect Are there sanctions? What area of fraud?
Are you asking me that?
Yes, please, just to clarify.
Well, look, let's say you'd accidentally accuse somebody of cohabitating when they're actually claiming the 25% reduction, and a mistake could be made. They then get sanctioned when they're not actually cohabitating. I just wondered if you've got anything in place to sort something like that, a mistake or an error.
Oh, okay. Just to make you aware, Councillor, what happens is that they are canvassed for the single person discount. So the discounts aren't automatically removed. The customers are asked to confirm what their current situation is. Now, if the evidence that we can then show indicates that what they're telling us is incorrect, we will challenge them back on that. And on that basis, we will then remove the discount if the evidence shows that what they're telling us is incorrect. And they do have opportunity to come back and challenge that. Excuse me.
Okay, thank you, Tracy.
I think as well, Councillor Bettron, if I can come in there. I mean, it's been a very interesting process, the single person discount process, because, you know, like I say, we had nearly 40,000 at the start of the process, and we must have, following an initial piece of work which gave us intelligence about the number of those claims where there might be potentially a second person living there. We issued many thousands of letters. The majority were able to prove to our satisfaction that yes, indeed, they were single, and therefore that the single person discount should continue. And those that couldn't, we took the action to remove the discount. It's important to say, I guess, that despite 1,500 or so being removed off our system, it's my understanding, and I would know this because they'd all come through to me as the head of service, we've not had one single complaint about the way that the process has run, and I think that's because we've done things proper. But if there was ever a case where we'd made a decision and, for example, we'd removed the 25% discount and somebody challenged us on that, and then we found out that maybe our incorrect decision was wrong, we would absolutely reinstate. You know, we accept that in the vast majority of cases we will get things right, but in the rare event if we got something wrong and we removed the discount, we would absolutely review and reinstate if there was evidence to show that our original decision was wrong.
All right, thanks, John.
Have we lost our chair? Yeah, I think he's dropped out again. I wonder if John or Wes could take over.
Absolutely, Lindsay.
Thank you.
Bear with, let's put that on as well. So, Paul, you had spoken. Lucy, question about appeal process? You're on mute, Lucy.
Sorry, I was sort of, I'm presuming that there is an appeal process, which I think is what Tracy and John were explaining to us. So that's fine.
That's fine. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for John or Tracy? No.
Vice Chair, if I can just maybe give a little bit more reassurance to Councillor Kerr on the appeal.
Absolutely.
Should we remove a single person discount? There is very much a formal appeal right. The first part of that process is that somebody appeals to the council that have made the decision, so that will come through to us. If we uphold our original decision, then the individual has a right to appeal to an independent valuation tribunal. So it is a two-stage appeal. The first stage is to us, the second stage is to an independent tribunal. So they very much do have an appeal process in place.
Well, thanks for that. I'm sorry, I've missed most of that because I've been having, it seems to be disconnecting and my iPad's not disconnecting, although all my personal devices are all still on our internet. So
it's all right, Chair. We covered for you.
I don't know what happens with the count, whether it's the council things that seem to be playing up. I don't know, but unfortunately, it doesn't have a wired. My Rolls Royce laptop will have a wired connection into it, or which it doesn't. The council one doesn't seem to have that facility. But there you go. So yeah. So any other questions on that at all? Otherwise, we'll move on to we'll just note the report and move on to swiftly on to the next item.
Noted, Chair. Are we going to move to the next item, or just look at the screen?
Sorry, Shiraz. I think Steve might have dropped out again.
Yeah, just to confirm, yes, he has. Yeah.
I think yes. We note the report. We thank John and Tracy and their teams for the work, and Richard as well, obviously, and move on to the next item. My paperwork is on the floor, so bear with me. So we are now at item 12, I think, which I believe is you, Richard.
Is it item 12 or item 13?
Sorry, I'm back in now. I have to stick with my iPad. Sorry.
Item 13.
I'm not going to mess around.
Item 13.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can. You're very quiet. Councillor Willoughby, you're very quiet. We're going on to item 13, which I think is Richard.
Right, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair. Yes, the item 13, the Internal Audit Progress Report. This provides an update to members of the committee on the progress and outcomes of audits from the 1920 plan since the last time I came to you in the February meeting. So basically it's giving progress since the 31st of December 2019. What you'll note from the report is that we've actually issued 28 items of audit work in the period to the 30th of June. 7 of these gave a comprehensive outcome, 7 reasonable, 6 limited, and 8 we didn't give any assurance on because they were a different type of audit. What I would point out before Councillor Kerr picks me up on it is that I have noticed a typo in there on the firm step. On the top of page 13, the table there on firm steps, the recommendation about the access to mailboxes actually says that the implementation date will be the 31st of December 2021. It'll actually be 2020, so it's not as bad as it looks. Also in there, what I'd like to say as well, on recommendation implementation, I've not gone into a great detail on this in the report because it has been affected by COVID-19. I've got no concerns that I wish to raise around implementation at the moment with the committee, mainly because of that. But what I do, just for other members of the committee, I do have regular meetings with the chair and vice chair, and we do talk about implementation of recommendations at that. So if there is anything, I'll be raising it with the chair and vice chair at our next meeting, and then bringing it to the next meeting of the committee. That's all I really wanted to say on the progress report, and if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take.
Thanks, Richard. Can you hear me now better? I've put a headset on, so hopefully that's better. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Chair.
Brilliant, that's good. Right, I'm back now, hopefully. So, yeah, does anybody have any questions or comments on that at all? Because I appreciate the sort of, and you're going to go on a bit more on the plan to look at the approach that we've got this year, on some, in particular, on some of the actual sort of recommendations. I'm bringing up the report because I did highlight on it some of the, I think you particularly highlighted some of the audit that you hadn't had a sort of any from 18-19, I think it was, wasn't it? Yes, where you hadn't had any feedback from yet. Yes. So I don't know if people on the committee would like to comment on that at all.
May I make a comment?
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Two stroke three things. The first one is the you've already mentioned that there have been joint meetings with the county council over the Sinfin waste plant, and I just presume that that has included internal audit. Because
the meeting was with external audits because they're the people who have to form a judgment of the accounting treatment. Obviously, the internal governance process of Sinfin, as evidenced in the risk surgery and everything else, is part of the universe that Richard has and is assessing, and will be assessing at all the key points in the process. But no, we haven't combined the internal audit sections together, if that's a question, Councillor Kerr.
Right, okay. I just thought there might be some sort of savings because the county must be doing some internal audit work as well on the Sinfin waste, and maybe there's value in both doing it, but I just wondered.
I would agree with you, so we can take that up in the local networking that we have anyway with the county council to make sure that there's any synergies and value from joint working where it's applicable.
Okay, thank you. Second one is whether I see that the assembly rooms have come off the system, but I really appreciate to know who's looking at what lessons there are to be learned from the whole of the assembly rooms history, if you like, since 2014, and I'm not sure who's going to do that if internal audit doesn't. So as the second question, so we've lost this specific. Oh, sorry, was I muted?
You were,
Okay.
yes, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry.
My IT had gone wrong again for a minute, but I could still see you speaking.
So no, I got banned up on my thing. In the assembly rooms, there must have been some learning since 2014, and I don't know who's going to look into any other additional learning that we're doing there, having had no longer doing the audit that was planned. Is there something that's wider that needs to be done on that front? And the second thing is that this report, which we're obviously having in June, or so July, end of July, it doesn't say very clearly on it for what dates it applies, and I believe it's the financial year up until the end of March. And I just think in terms of reading it and looking at it, the recommendation tracking goes up to June. It doesn't seem to be very clear as to which plan we're looking at and what applies to. Does that make sense? So, finally, I was going to ask, looking forwards, home to school transport, and whether we're looking at the impacts of COVID on home to school transport, which I understand are going to be quite severe.
Okay, do you want to come back on that, Richard? And I've got some questions, I believe. If anybody else I've missed off, for you to, you can sort of come back at me. I've got Councillor West and Councillor Dinser, and Councillor West said she's happy for Dinser to come in first because his question is related to Councillor Kerr. So I'll do that in that order. Then we can deal with that all in one go, if that's okay. If you want to come back to Councillor Kerr first, then Councillor Dinser, and then Councillor West.
Chair, if I can just pick up on Councillor Kerr's comments about the report and the dates on it. It's strictly to do with the 2019-20 plan. However, quite a lot of the work, we don't always finish the plan as at the 31st of March, and a lot of that work's carried forward. So that carry forward work is continually reported on in this report as well. We report the actual cut-off date for all items that go into this report was the 30th of June of this year. Hence why the recommendation tracking goes up to the 30th of June. So yeah, it's covered in the actual contents page. It says recommendation tracking is at the 30th of June to give the clue there, but it is the 1920 internal audit plan. But what I will do is I'll make sure that it's a lot clearer in future reports. The problem being, of course, with having the last two meetings cancelled, it's a much bigger report than I normally would like to bring to you.
Okay, thanks. So
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. Councillor Dinser.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Richard, I understand that there's not been meetings that have been cancelled because of COVID-19 and other matters, and but I'm not, and it's a long report. Can you just clarify on the assembly rooms, whether it's in this, it may be here or another agenda item, one of the decisions of not to progress with the council's ambitions to bring the assembly rooms back to operation, and that was sort of set aside. One of the things was about there was £1.2 million capital write-off. Are you able to sort of give any information about what is that correct, and how much more was sort of the negative implications of the decision not to progress with the plans that the City Council executive had on this assembly rooms coming back online?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dinser. The outturn report for last year showed that approximately £2.5 million had been incurred in the refurbishment of the assembly rooms. The accounting judgment is half of those are capital costs that would be required for the demolition, and therefore things like asbestos surveys and everything else, so they can remain as capital. But there is 1.2 million of costs incurred that could not be treated under accounting rules as capital expenditure. That was also reported in council in response to a member question last week, and there will be inevitably costs linked to the demolition, which we will be going out to tender for to try and secure best value, but those costs aren't known at the moment.
Right. Can I follow up, Chair, on the post? Are we saying that, do you anticipate any other costs that might come about? I understand with the demolition, you may not know at this stage what actually the final cost would be, and you've got 1.2 million against that.
Yeah.
But is there any other costs that as a result of the implication of the decision to step back from that particular ambition that the council had?
Yeah, in the committee report on the performance venue, we mentioned that we will be commissioning the termination procedures in respect of the assembly room refurbishment, because you're aware that we had secured through Escape Framework Waits as the contractor and Perfect Circle as the advisors. So that termination and any consequential impact of that is still being assessed.
Right. Do we have a timeline as to when that might be concluded?
There are discussions between the Director of Property and Waits and Perfect Circle at the moment, so that, as you're aware, contract termination sometimes can be very quick by agreement and can sometimes be rather prolonged through disagreements. So I wouldn't want to give the answer yet because I don't know which way it's going to go.
Well, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. Councillor West.
Thank you, Chair. I've lost my page now, sorry. Lucy did mention it briefly. It was about the home to school transport, Richard. And I suppose just because it is one of the sort of the weakest limited assurance ratings. Just a question really about why you think there's such a need to have such a long date on there. Some of the actions aren't due until the end of May 2021. And yeah, just asking for a little bit of a bit more detail on that, please.
Yep. Yes, thank you, Councillor West. The key reason we looked at homeschool transport, we were approached by one of the directors in Peoples to because they were the service was transferring across to them from within communities in place, and that's one of the reasons why the recommendation's taken a long time, because it's in a transitional period moving across into People's services now for them to be managing it. And what they basically wanted us to do was have a look at the system that was in place, and were they inheriting a good system, or were they inheriting a system that would need work on it. And of course, as you can see, we've told them that in our opinion it's a system that needs some work on it, so there's quite a lot of work for them to do, and it's a new area for them, and so we've given them a bit more leniency, should we say, with implementation of recommendations.
Thank you for that. Makes perfect sense.
Okay, thanks for that. Just one more question. Now I've sorted myself out after my IT problems. We've got, if you notice at the bottom of page 5, I know we discussed it in the pre-agenda meeting where you said that brought forward jobs from the previous year, that's 18-19, fixed assets is still at draft report. And I don't know if you've commented on that on bits I've missed, Richard, and I apologise if you have. But I don't know if that's something we're worth, because obviously you explained that the relevant officer concerned had been redeployed as part of the COVID thing, whether it's worth sort of expressing our view that we'd like further detail on why that report from from the 18-19 year is still at draft.
Yeah, I mean, it has taken a long time, Chair, to get responses on this. It's something that I've been talking to Simon about in his role as Section 151 officer, and he's also mentioned that it's something that he'll pick up with the Director for Property and around that as well to try and move things on. The Strategic Director is also aware of this. It's an issue that we have from time to time. Clearly, given the nature of it being fixed assets, it's something we want to secure a response on. What we don't want to do is be issuing an audit report where management have not come back to us on it. It's not often that we have audits that take this long to come to fruition, but we are working on it behind the scenes. But it's perhaps something that Simon and I will pick up with you and the Vice Chair at one of our meetings, if that's preferable, unless you really want to discuss it at the committee now.
Okay, thanks. We'll bring it up at one of our we can discuss that at one of our meetings that we have, if everybody's okay with that. So if there's no other comments on that, then does anybody else want to ask a question? Otherwise, we'll just note that report and then bring you on to the next one that's sort of linked, really. Okay, if there's no other comments,
fair, yes.
Yeah. If there's no other comments on that, we'll note that one then, and then we'll bring you on to item 14. So I propose we just talk about on this one, because it's got the same information in it. I suppose we ask you questions more around your actual head of audit opinion, which is the additional item that you've brought into this one.
That's fine, Chair. That's perfect, because this report just summarises all the progress reports, and it feeds in to my opinion, and that's the key part of this, which will also then be picked up for the annual governance statement as well. That, in my opinion, there's an adequate system of governance, risk and internal control subject to reservations, and those reservations are brought out within the annual report.
That's okay. Any questions from anybody at all? And I'm sorry, on my because I'm coming in on my iPad. What I'd lose is I don't have all of the pictures of you. I just unable to see myself and the presenter. So who's speaking at the moment? So if anybody's got any questions, if you want to just come in at all. No, that's okay then. So we'll just, I think it's fairly, I think your audit opinion, given the sort of where the council's at, I think sounds perfectly reasonable around that, what you said. So we'll note that report if everybody's okay, and then we will move on to item 15, which is the internal audit plan for this year and the internal audit charter as well.
Thank you again, Chair. Yes, normally I'd be bringing the plan to committee in March. However, unfortunately, the pandemic saw the end to me being able to bring that. So basically, possibly in a good way, that it has been a benefit from an audit plan point of view. And there's been a lot of changes to the way the council operates because of COVID-19. And one of the things that is concern to me as head of internal audit is how risks have changed and that type of thing. So that's one of the things I will be needing to look at over the next few months. The internal audit plan needs to reflect how the council has changed the way it operates and also how the risks have changed in the way it achieves its objectives. So following consultation with both yourself, Chair, and the Vice Chair, and also more predominantly the Section 151 officer, I'm proposing in this report a more flexible and agile approach to an audit plan than I would normally have done in the past. And it may well be something we have to consider for the future as well. It may well see a change to the way we do internal audits and the way we plan for internal audits. And that is something that Simon and I are conversing about at the moment. There are key issues that I will always need to gain assurance on and provide assurance to you as a committee on. And that's how the council is managing its fraud risks, whether there have been changes to the control environment brought about by the need to respond to the pandemic and other issues. What has the impact on the governance of the council been? And the way we can tackle that will benefit from a less rigid internal audit plan. However, I'm still going to need to provide an opinion to the council at the end of the financial year, which means I need to make sure that internal audit has undertaken sufficient work to enable me to do this. And the report, in item 15, outlines the key considerations and challenges for internal audit that COVID-19 has brought. So I've brought those out in that report. What I've also done in the report is to highlight to you in Table 1 the work that we've done in Q1 of the 2020-21 financial year. And this, in my opinion, has provided me with a good foundation to start building for the rest of the next 3 quarters to pull together that opinion work. The key areas for focus for the remainder of the year are detailed in Table 2. So you can see there what I've got planned for quarters 2 to 4. Again, it's not a rigid plan. It's more, it's more flexible. It's broad areas in which I will be doing audit work underneath that. And what I've done in chart in paragraph 4.14 is show the proposed audit percentage coverage for those from our resources we have available for those key areas. So you can see that in there that fraud is going to be one of my key areas, and that's something that I think Philip Sunderland mentioned earlier, and that Simon and I have been certainly talking about, is that SIPFA have highlighted, fraud risks as something that internal audit really needs to be focusing on, certainly in this current year. And also with the plan, I'm also bringing the CMAP internal audit charter for the committee's consideration and approval. And what I would say about that is it's a charter that covers all of CMAP. It's not specific just to Derby City. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that, Richard. Hope you can all still hear me. Yeah, I think we've discussed this, obviously, this approach, and I think you even alluded to it at the training session we had. So I think it shouldn't come as a surprise, and I think it's obviously the sensible approach to take, in current climate, and indeed a sensible thing because it addresses those ongoing risks, and I think it probably ties the audit program in sort of closely perhaps to the risks that the ongoing risk register and that sort of thing from the meeting. So I have, first of all, Phil Sunderland wants to ask a question.
Okay, thank you. Couple of things. I welcome the move about fraud and corruption, because quite clearly the plan will need to be a certain amount of flexibility around this, because we don't actually know what's going to happen. But SIPFA have, as Richard mentioned, SIPFA have recently expanded their advice about what authorities should be looking at, to look at not just what goes on, but what could go on, and current auditing really, rather than looking backwards. It needs to be things going on at the moment, because things is changing all the while, as we've said several times during the course of the meeting. So the plan, to a certain extent, will need to be certainly slightly flexible on that regard. On a slightly different matter, the partnership contribution, as it's called, which is really basically the cost of internal audit, £498,000, which is a 3.8% increase on previous year. Why has that gone up by that extent when one or two of the areas, presumably there's now less schools for them to look at, so there's less audits to do at schools, because schools have gone out to other organisations to run. who's determined that is a correct figure, and when was that approved? Because I'm not quite sure how CMAP works, what the body runs it. I've asked this question before. I'm still not quite sure exactly how the plan is agreed for the whole of the CMAP and everybody's things, because quite clearly Derbyshire City Council is the major player in the organisation, and it is the major cost and the major person who requires more audit than the others. So I'm not quite sure how it fits in. Could perhaps Rich expand on that, please?
Yes, I can, Chair. I'm sorry, do you want to speak, Simon?
I think Simon wanted to come in as well, actually.
Yeah.
So don't you want to take Simon first, and you can add anything he's missed, Richard, maybe.
The CMAP is made up, as you know, of a number of councils who have members, effectively board meetings, and an operational group made up of the Section 151 officers or monitoring officers. So Richard, as the head of CMAP, come to us with the plan for the following year, including his own resource, any purchasing resource that we require. That might be specialist resource or sort of top-up resource. And he will also highlight any potential use of reserves or investment that we might have to make, for example, in new audit software, etc. So that meeting happened just before COVID, where it was brought to the board, and the board agreed that the budget was going to be at the level it was, and our share was, as you've stated, Philip. And in that, you're aware that CMAP operates on sort of it's a resource for all of CMAP. We don't purchase per se a number of days, but Richard tries to prioritise the work and skills of his team to achieve both our audit plan and a proportionate amount of days. You might also be aware that in previous years we have underspent against the estimated sort of cost of CMAP. So that is how the CMAP works, and I think the flexibility of CMAP and the cost of CMAP is actually evidenced as being good value.
Sorry, and I should mention, I didn't take myself off mute there, I should mention that I'm actually a member of that board in my role as chair of this committee. So yeah, I was at the meeting that you referred to, Simon, as well, where it was discussed. So the next question then is Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. Looking at table 2, which Richard mentioned earlier, I want to be able to look at post-COVID recovery, but I don't think we're going to be post-COVID for a while. So I'm not sure that the recovery plan stroke post-COVID is actually what we're looking at this year. I think we're in COVID this year. And I just wonder whether maybe next time we look at it, we could have a different title. So,
comment on that?
Sorry, Chair. I think it's actually vital that internal audit is involved in the COVID recovery work, because you're aware, because it's already gone to council,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. DCC recovery plan is definitely the right phrasing. I'm not objecting to that. It's the idea of it being post-COVID. I think COVID might be with us for decades.
Oh, COVID will not disappear as a virus.
Exactly.
What you're trying to do is to mitigate through vaccines and other things the impact of it.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the arrangements we're going to put in place for how we not only manage public health but public service across the city as a result of the learning, and also maybe the ongoing impact of COVID. So, but the descriptor is there to capture, if you want to call it the new world, but Richard has articulated that actually the world of audit that he would have looked at, the universe of audits 6 months ago, has changed fundamentally.
Yeah, and I think
I agree. I think Simon, we're on the same understanding here. My concern is the title that talks about DCC recovery plan, which is accurate and correct, is also linked to post COVID-19, and I don't think we're going to be post COVID-19. It's with COVID-19. So it's a mindset,
Well,
not a reality.
We will reflect on your contribution, but I think, to be honest, the world of what are we going to do post COVID is in the sort of is in the narrative that is often used by public sector bodies, community, everyone else. So yes, we'll reflect and see whether we want to change it, Councillor Chair.
I think what you're.
I think actually that is possibly part of the concern, that there is still this thinking that we can get beyond it, but it will continue to be there, even if continuing to be there means that we are having, most of the population is being vaccinated twice a year or something. We'll still be within a COVID environment. That's my concern.
I think what we're saying here, I think what they're trying to say, and I think it's the thing they can reflect on really is that COVID is going to be with us, but it's almost like that environment in which we're managing. We're stepping on now with the local lockdowns and other things, other measures and quarantines and things like that. And then even once we find some sort of cure or injection and stuff for it, obviously vaccine for it and that sort of thing. And I think it's really in line with that sort of thinking. Really, is how the ongoing situation is going to be managed. And I think, as Simon has said, it's what they refer to as post-COVID, and everybody sort of knows what they mean. I think that's what people are getting at. So I would suggest that we move on, unless anybody else has got any other comments on that. I think it very much reflects the ongoing situation and what he said as my opening remarks on this were with the thing. So I think we can just take the recommendations there as printed. I propose that to need to vary the approach for developing and delivering the internal audit plan, and then also I know people haven't commented on Appendix 1. Is everybody okay with that internal audit charter as well? I don't think I had any comments on it really. So I propose we just take the recommendations as printed there, unless anybody's got any objections to that. No? Good.
I support that, Chair.
Good, thank you. And everybody else, I'm sorry I can't see on the system I'm on now, I can't see your faces. As I say, I can only see the presenter. So speak up or forever hold your peace, as the old expression used to say. So the next item then is item 16, which is for you as well, which I think is just, again, Richard, is just for noting this report really, because it's something that's coming from SIPFA, but it does legally have to go through this committee.
It is, Chair, it's really just to bring to the committee's attention that you'll no longer see us referring to things as comprehensive assurance. We'll now be talking about substantial assurance.
Any questions on that, or otherwise are we okay to note that?
No, noted, Chair.
No, good, brilliant. Right, we'll note that one then. Good. Right, so the next bit is I have to read out something. We have to do something with the, we all have to confirm, we have to read out something with the IT. So for item 18, for which Andy's been patiently waiting, no doubt, is to consider a resolution to exclude the press and public during consideration of the following items. Under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following items on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Democratic Service Officer Steve Mason just to guide us through the next bit, if that's all right, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So two things I need to quickly do here. First of all, one of my colleagues, I think it's Dominic, will confirm when the broadcast has ended for us.